You know, Oz, people underestimate you, but not me. I've always known you were capable of more.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my Penguin breakdown of episode 1, which was titled After Hours, which to me could speak to the idea that Alberto Falcone went to the Iceberg Lounge after hours, a decision he would later regret. This was a gritty and raw and fascinating premiere episode, and there's a lot to dig into. Spoilers ahead. We open with hearing the news coverage from the events that took place during the film The Batman, leading up to the Riddler's final plans for destroying Gotham's corruption and unmasking this truth by flooding the streets, as we see the Penguin watches from where we last saw him looking at the sunrise, something to keep in mind throughout this episode. 1 week after Riddler's attack, we see that the city's struggling to recover. While the wealthiest were spared, we see the streets post-flood are hit by a crime wave. Now, to me, I've covered this on a video on my channel regarding the confirmation from the show writers that the Batman will not be appearing in the show, but doesn't rule out that Bruce Wayne might not pop up. Again, check out that video on the channel. But the news headline talking about the crime wave across Gotham could be the show's reasoning to why the Batman will not be in the show, because he's busy saving Gotham post-flood and he's dealing with other things across Gotham.
It's a big city. I can't be everywhere.
Now we get our first major change from the film The Batman to this television series as we see that they have recast Carmine Falcone. Now even though he's dead, we see that he's now being played by the great actor Mark Strong. Now for people like myself that fan casting him as Mr. Freeze and Matt Reeves' The Batman Part 2, I guess we can knock his name off the list. Now to backtrack, Strong did take over the role who was previously played by John Turturro, who played Falcone in the Batman film. Now my guess to why they recasted the character, but we'll probably see flashbacks of the character throughout this series, as the news reports that Alberto Falcone is said to be taking over the family business. Now, I gotta mention before moving on, after rewatching The Batman for the millionth time right before watching this episode, seeing the streets of Gotham and the tone and the music playing in the background, it just makes me feel like we never left this world, and to me, it's a perfect handoff from the film into the television series. We watch as Oz heads to the Iceberg Lounge with a sledgehammer in hand, and I love this little Easter egg with him using his umbrella, which in many depictions of the characters, an umbrella is the Penguin's signature weapon, as he uses the hammer to gather one file hidden behind a wall, and he takes interest in a particular piece of information that he's going to use for later. Now, to have a file behind a wall seems to be a secret that Carmine wanted to keep to himself, or at least in a contingency plan that Falcone kept hidden from everyone else. One of the photos that stood out to me, at least in connection to this episode, was this particular photo showing the actor Michael Kelly, who's going to be playing Johnny, who we meet a little bit later in this very episode. Now, in the comics, he is an underboss of the Falcone crime family. In the picture that Oz looks at and he gets excited about, it's showing Johnny engaging in some type of affair or sexual activity with some unknown woman. Now, the question is, will Oz use this against him in the future after their encounter later in this episode? As we see, Oz comes across some jewelry, and it's very clear that he was going to take this, but we see Alberto arrives as we see Oz plays coy as if he was going to give this to him to begin with. This to me is one of many examples shown in this very episode, as we see Oz being a quick thinker on his feet. As Oz celebrates Alberto's new position, Oz and Al share a drink as Al also takes some drops. They talk about this new deal that Al's got going as he's seeking to revolutionize the drug game and potentially replacing the drops on the street of Gotham with something new, and doesn't want the others to know about it quite yet. Now, I'm very curious to learn more about this new drug on Gotham streets, because if you're familiar with the Batman lore and even going back to the Batman the movie, that is very synonymous with Gotham as far as the main drug that they use on the streets. So what will they introduce, and who could be cooking up this new drug? Is it someone from Batman's rogues gallery? Could it be someone like Hugo Strange or someone like the Scarecrow? Let me know if you are thinking that someone of importance will be involved in this new drug. We learn about the infamous ring that Carmine wore all the time, as we also find out that it once belonged to the mob boss Salvatore Maroni, as Carmine wore it as a trophy, and it symbolizes power to the person who wore it. Now, it's important to remember that the Batman established their version of Salvatore Maroni as someone who once ran Gotham, but after Thomas Wayne died and his renewal plan was fought over by the powers that be of Gotham, whether it was Carmine Falcone, the DA, the Commissioner, and others, they set up Salvatore Maroni, and he's been in prison for the last 20 years. And you gotta imagine he was probably pretty happy to hear the news of what happened to Carmine. As Oz and Al continue their conversation, we see Oz talks about a gangster he admired while growing up by the name of Rex Calabrese. Yet another character that comes from the comics, as he was a lion-themed Gotham City mobster created in the New 52. Now, unfortunately, unless they use him in flashbacks, we learn that Rex passed away when Oz was 14. Now, not to jump too far ahead, but I wonder if Rex will be secretly revealed to be Oz's true father, who we see is mentioned by his mother later in this episode. Now, after hearing a story about Rex, we see Al misunderstands the story and thinks that Oz is either thinking of him to be too little, or the story was about Oz's dream that he hopes to be remembered like one day. As Al laughs in Oz's face and calls his dream pathetic and mocks him, we see this leaves Oz to shooting and killing him. Now, I'll be honest, initially I thought this was a dream sequence because, I mean, we've seen it 1,000 times in movies and shows where a character imagines killing a person, but a second later we find out that it's fake. But no, that's not the case with this show. He just killed Al, the current head of the family business, and he laughs at first, but realizes what he just did as the title card appears. So much to love about this opening scene, but one of the things I want to point out is understanding why Oz shot him. Now, he mentions it later that he laughed at him, and we'll talk about that. But remember, it's been less than 24 hours since Al's father, Carmine, laughed at him in a similar fashion and made fun of Oz, and we know that Oz tried to kill him before the Riddler did, so to me, Oz had a bullet ready for the Falcone family. But to go back to that opening scene, it just set the table and set the tone for the rest of this episode and sets the stage for what to expect moving forward. We see Oz gets the body prepared to get rid of, and I thought this was an interesting little small moment where initially Oz is carrying the body down each step, but then he realizes he's dead and he tosses the body down instead. It's almost like he's so used to respecting the Falcone family and carrying their weight, but not anymore. As Oz heads out, he sees that some kids are trying to jack his purple car, as Oz manages to catch one of them by the name of Victor, who will end up saving Oz by the end of this episode. Now, I could be wrong, and let me know in the comments below, but the Victor character, I believe, is just created for the purposes of the show and doesn't have any lore from the comics. Again, let me know in the comments below. But we see Oz makes Vic help by telling him,
"This scumbag, you disrespected me, you're gonna disrespect me, Vic." No, because you and me, we're in this together now.
As this new relationship begins. We see Oz goes through Al's phone before crushing him with his gun, and he finds the date of this new shipment drug, which is on the 18th. But my question is, what exactly is Gotham Knights is going to take place on the 23rd? Is that just like an Easter egg to the video game and the characters by the name of Gotham Knights? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. Now in the car, we see Oz and Vic having a conversation, as Oz and Vic both come from a similar neighborhood on the east side, as Oz shares a childhood story with him about his brothers and how they used to go to the corner mart, the same one that we visit at the end of this episode. Notice that Vic has a stutter, and I'm pretty sure it's because he's nervous right now because his life might be ending anytime soon, but I'm also curious to know if Oz sees a little bit of himself in Vic, and maybe he had a stutter when he was young. Now, to me, a character trait like this could lead to something later. You'll notice that Vic's stutter slowly goes away by the end of this episode, which could also mean that he's more comfortable around Oz, but I also wonder if he'll come back at some point later in the season, showing that he is nervous in a particular situation, and that stutter being like Oz's way to know that he's lying about something. So as an audience, I think it'll be interesting to kind of follow his stutter throughout the series, like if he'll just eventually get rid of it by the end of the show, just showing how confident he is and how different he is from the beginning to the end. So definitely keep an eye out for the stutter moving forward for the Victor character. I definitely had to point this out again, just having watched The Batman. I love that we get to see this little Easter egg of the same street that we saw the robbery happening in the opening scene of The Batman. We see that Oz and Vic arrive to Eve's place, as this appears to be Oz's lady friend, who he needs to cover for him as an alibi, as she agrees to help. Now, we don't see Eve in the rest of this episode, but I do wonder how important she will be moving forward, and if she'll get roped into the story as leverage against Oz, and if she'll keep his secret. Now, Oz gets rid of the evidence by burning it away and grabs a bite to eat with Vic before dumping the body, and you can just get the sense that Oz definitely has plans to get rid of Vic, and I think Vic is very much aware of that. We see that just in a couple scenes later, but I think the reason why Oz ultimately decides to keep Vic around is because he does see a little bit of himself in Vic. Now, they eventually find a car to dump the body in for now, which is the same car that we see later in the episode, but before leaving, Oz takes Salvatore's ring. Now, Oz says to Vic to take a look at the sun sunrise, obviously thinking he's about to die, but instead Oz gives him a cigar and tells him exactly whose body they've been handling all night. As Oz thinks that Vic can be useful, at least for now, but promises to kill him if he steps out of line as he watches the sunrise. Again, this whole looking at the sunrise seems to be something important to Oz. Now, he does that obviously at the end of the Batman, at the beginning of the show. He does it now, so it definitely has some type of importance to him. Now, does that stem from some type of childhood trauma or childhood memory, or is it some type of metaphor of him rising from the dark into his power? As they eventually arrive to Oz's place and we see Vic looks around and he sees a photo of what appears to be a young Oz with two other kids, most likely his brothers that he mentioned a little bit earlier, and you can also see this same exact photo later at his mom's house. As we get a little bit of an insight on why Oz walks with a limp as he takes his shoes off, and we see that one of his toes on his feet are all mushed together. To me, this is the show's grounded approach to explaining why Oz walks with a limp, rather than it being the comic book walk like a penguin reasoning. I love this overhead shot of showing us parts of Gotham that was hit the hardest during the floods. You'll even notice signs on buildings saying "help us" and "don't forget about us," which is definitely a more grounded approach to us as an audience, remembering to what happened to New Orleans during Katrina. And it just also just continues to paint the picture of the poor conditions of the forgotten parts of Gotham and what they're experiencing. But another key thing that I love about this moment is you'll notice that the Riddler's theme is playing in the background during this scene, just kind of again showing his actions of what he did to Gotham. Oz has to go back to business as usual to keep appearances normal as he heads back into work, as we see Oz is preparing to blackmail a politician as he's got some dirt on him and he owes some debt to Carmine. Now you'll notice this is the same guy he took from the hidden file at the Iceberg Lounge. Now despite the recent flood, we see that the drop still must go out as one of their men was jumped and had their stash taken. Again, this is just showcasing that the crimes of the streets are still happening at an all-time high, and it's also showing that they're preparing this show to show this gang war is potentially coming. As Oz gets called in by the Falcone family, I love this line here as he explains to Vic how he has to operate when he's around them.
It's all a song and dance. 9 times out of 10, these top-tier guys want to meet face-to-face to feel big, so I make myself small. They feel better about themselves, and I get to go back to work.
You get to meet the characters Milo and Johnny, again Johnny being the same character who we saw that photo of that Oz took, as Oz learns of the movement and shutdown of one of his plants that he ran, and they say that they want to shut it down because of the recent floods, but also because of the heat on their back after the recent changes in the Falcone family. Now obviously Oz isn't happy about the news, but he's reminded that this isn't his business, but instead it's the family's, and he has to do what he's told. But again, we get to see Oz thinking quick on his feet as he uses Al's plans for this new business and this new drug to buy him some time to prove himself. Now as Oz is going over this plan and how it can potentially be profitable and he'll be able to run this operation smoothly, in comes Sophia Falcone, who's Carmine's daughter, who was recently released from Arkham. I love the introduction to this character in the show with her wearing all white. It's almost like she's a new person. She's sent from the heavens as an angel, but if you're familiar with Sophia like I am from the comics and also the animated movies, trust me, she is far from an angel. Now within this brief conversation, we learn that Al actually refused to bring his bodyguards with him the night that he went to the Iceberg Lounge, which explains why he was alone, which is a question I had a little bit earlier in the show, like if you're this new head of the family, why don't you have any security with you? But again, the question is, why did he go to the Iceberg Lounge by himself, which I'm hoping is something that's revealed later on. Now we see Sophia asking Oz if he's seen her brother, which he obviously says no, but we also see that Oz learns that he only has 48 hours to shut down his plant. Again, remember that Oz has some dirt on Johnny, and I bet you that he'll use that against him sooner rather than later. Now outside, we see Oz is yet again confronted by Sophia as she asks him if he's seen her brother, and of course again he says no, but she notices the bullet holes in his car and she invites him for a bite to eat. Now Sophia takes him to a spot that her father would take her and her brother when they were younger. Now you'll notice that Sophia is eating like she hasn't had a decent meal in a while, which probably speaks to her literally just getting out of Arkham, as we can notice that other people are looking at her in shame. As we see Sophia talking about her presence in the city of Gotham and how people look at her, as she talks about the story of how people used to call her Hangman, as she's known around the parts as a psycho killer. Now Sophia briefly brings up the relationship that Oz had with her father, at least their working relationship, as we may explore how Oz got involved with the Falcones, and it's actually something that we get a little bit of insight in the conversation that's had a little bit later in this episode. Now again, we just saw yet another example how smart and intelligent Oz can be when he is put on the spot, as he makes up the story that her brother told Oz about his plans, but to keep it a secret, and technically he's not lying. Now, Oz brings up the fact that her brother was an addict and he's done this before, where he would go missing for days after going on the bender. And he also brings up the fact that he has an alibi that he was with his friend Eve. I absolutely love the foreshadowing in this conversation of Oz saying that her brother will turn up and he's sure of it, and later we see that he definitely pops up again. I thought the interaction between these two characters was excellent, and the sheer presence of Sophia is intoxicating. Now Oz is clearly aware that he should be very careful around Sophia, and I love the presence of the character so far, and their scenes together definitely gets me excited to see what they're going to be doing for the rest of the season moving forward. I gotta call out this little character detail, but also a great callback to the Batman. When Oz and Vic are on the subway, you'll notice that Oz doesn't sit in the handicap seats. That's because in my mind he doesn't see himself in that light, but I also have to point out that random person who's handing out the QR codes, who says, you know, scan this code and you'll learn the truth about Gotham. You'll notice that that is one of the Riddler's followers because of the mask he's wearing. We see that Oz takes Vic to his mother's house, and we see that he gifts his mom the same jewelry that he found in Carmine's secret stash, and you'll notice that she's not calling him Oz, but instead she's calling him by his actual name. Again, this to me is an example of how the show's going to humanize the character, having his mother interacting with him, having interactions with Vic, but then also showing that this character is corrupt, that he is evil, and he's killing people and getting people killed. So I'm just loving how they're handling this character so far. And you get a sense that his mom, Frances Cobb, is dealing with some type of mental issues with her not taking her meds. Now, I could be wrong, but I think that his mother might suffer from Alzheimer's because she mentions that she hid her medicine in the tub to keep away from the boys. Now, I'm assuming she's referring to Oz and his brothers when they were younger, that she would probably do this, which, by the way, do you all think that his brothers are still alive? I think that they may have died, and we might get some backstory on that, because you'll notice that in this scene, Oz says to her that he's all she's got, meaning that his brothers are no longer alive. Now, after his recent encounter with Sophia, Oz is here to skip town with his mom, and she knows that he's on a run, and she says,
Tell me first what I did to lose your respect. I'm in here, you're trying to buy me off with a necklace? About an urgent special occasion.
Ma.
Did I raise my sons to lie to me? What did you do? Come on, what did you do?
Oz eventually tells his mom why he ultimately killed Al, because he was embarrassed, and that seems to be something that triggers him, because going back to the Batman, he was embarrassed that Falcone called him out and he wanted to shoot him. So we can tell that embarrassing him, laughing at him, is a triggering point for Oz. Now, to assess this relationship between the mother and son, you definitely get a sense that this relationship is very interesting to say the least, as she reminds him who he is and hypes him up. But also, it's important to point out that she's very aware of what her son does, and again, this makes me think that she's used to this line of business, whether it's her son or sons. But I want to go back to my theory, and I could be completely wrong about this, but maybe she and Rex, who we know Oz looked up to, who was the big mobster in the town, maybe they were together and Oz doesn't know that that's actually his father. Now, as we wrap up this episode, we see Vic shares his concerns when not being able to live up to this lifestyle, but Oz reminds him that they were made for this. Now, within that conversation, it sounded like to me that Vic might have lost his home and potentially his family during the Gotham floods, which would explain his sense of desperation and why he's hanging around Oz as they're getting the next steps of Oz's plan into motion. Now, this relationship so far between Vic and Oz is just so fascinating to me, because I can see it ending one of two ways. And I think it's going to be, number one, very important to the series, obviously, but I don't see it ending well for Vic. Or could you all see him maybe being Oz's right-hand man by the end of the series, and he will be like his main guy leading to the Batman Part 2? Now, we cut to seeing Oz paying a visit to the famous Batman lore prison of Blackgate to see Sal Maroni, played by the incredible Clancy Brown. We see Oz telling Sal that he wants to work for him, and he gives him the rundown of the situation. Now, Sal calls out Oz for trying to buy his loyalty, but what's important to me is his refusal to join Oz. He mentions in this conversation that it was Oz's drug house that was busted during the raid or the takedown of Saul, which basically is him implying that Oz was in on the takedown of Saul and that he knew that Carmine was a rat, which to me just adds so much more context to the confrontation that we saw in front of the Iceberg Lounge in the Batman, where Oz was calling him that rat. That was a power move by Oz to show that he was in control, but also to look down upon Carmine Carmine in front of his men. Now Saul eventually tells Oz to go screw himself and to leave, but before he does, Oz gives him back his ring, as Oz tells him exactly how he got it.
They've been flaunting what they done to you for years.
But how is it that you have it?
Maybe more than what you think.
Now, in the final moments of this episode, we see Sophia and her men are outside of Oz's place, and Sophia spots him in his car and they go after him. Oz almost manages to escape by hiding in the trunk and gets one of the men hit by a school bus, but he eventually gets caught. Notice how Sophia's wardrobe went from her wearing all white to her now wearing all black in this interaction, which to me shows her true colors. Now, Sophia tells Oz about the promise her brother made to her when he would visit her in Arkham. Now, Oz's story is holding up, and since Sophia found one of the kids that Oz shot at outside of the club, the same one he claimed that he wasn't at the night of her brother's murder. I don't want to sound like a broken record, but yet another example of Oz making his way out of a situation as he gets that kid killed, making Sophia put her murderous ways to the test. Now, with a wire against his arm and bleeding out, Sophia wants to know if he thinks that she's crazy and wants to know if her brother is still alive. But at the last second, a car outside hits the wall, causing a distraction. Now, Sophia looks in the trunk and finds her brother's dead body with the words payback inside of the trunk, with his ring finger missing, as she screams and Oz laughs. Chills, I mean legit chills, were running through me during this scene because this was such a great setup. Seeing Sophia screaming in pain after losing her brother against Oz, who's laughing in the same way that he did when he killed him, was just perfect. As our last shot of the episode shows Vic and Oz getting that mixed drink that they were talking about earlier in the episode, as this was all a part of Oz's plan. Now, with Sal having his ring back, it sets the stage for a war between the families as Vic and Oz are prepared to go to work 9 to 5 to take over Gotham.
I'm gonna run this goddamn city, and I want you in on it. Yeah, you earned it. You know, for the most part. Guys like us, we gotta stick together. Want to survive? You gotta adapt. You gotta respond to the environment, the situation. You gotta think on your feet. You gotta be quick. Otherwise, this is what happens. Whatever Carmine threw at me, I delivered on. Every goddamn time.
Welcome back, everybody. This is my Penguin breakdown of episode 2 titled Inside Man. To me, this episode was all about survival for Oz, him making it out alive during the truck heist, him navigating the funeral scene with the knife situation, as he just continues to prove that he's got what it takes to adapt and survive, but now he's got a dance partner in Sophia by the end of this episode. We got a lot to get into in this breakdown, spoilers ahead. We open with Sophia at Arkham as Hangman is being whispered by a woman in the background, making it feel like a scene out of Nightmare on Elm Street, as she's brought to go see her now deceased brother Al. Sophia notices that his finger is missing while he's promising to get her out of Arkham, just as he's being shot by an unknown person behind him, as Sophia sees flashes of him in the trunk and him getting killed over and over and over again. As we cut to seeing that she's actually in a therapy session with her therapist, Dr. Julian Rush, who calms her down and tells her that she's not in Arkham anymore and that she's safe, as she responds by telling him,
I'm not safe. I'm home.
A few things I want to mention from this opening scene. Number one, this vision/nightmare was incredibly effective, and yet again, it gives us moments like this to humanize these bad people, these villains, and showing us how close she was to her brother and how his death is affecting her. Now, the next thing I want to point out, do Sophia and Dr. Rush have a romantic relationship? Because if you look back at this scene, the way he's calming her down and holding her down seemed very physical for a therapist to be doing and kind of crossing that boundary line. Now, we don't see any more of Dr. Rush in this episode, but I'm pretty sure that we'll be seeing him again. And lastly, I want to mention, now this is just a theory, but I'm unsure if Julian Rush is a stand-in for Jonathan Kane, aka the Scarecrow, who in the comics was also a therapist. Now, could he loosely be based on that comic book character, or is he just a new character altogether? Comment your thoughts on Dr. Rush and his relationship with Sophia, but also let me know if you think he's posing as this show's Scarecrow in the comments below. As we cut to Oz outside in the rain as he's headed back into Blackgate to revisit Sal Maroni. This time around, Sal's got his family and crew present, as you'll notice that he has his ring back on. Now, Sal is very aware of the war that Oz is waging between the families and isn't seeing getting into business with Oz as a smart business plan. Oz tells him about the new Don Luca, who we meet in this episode, as he tells him,
Falcons are still licking their wounds. They're distracted. And I get the inside track with the new Don. It can work. We can take them all down, Sal. We You gotta do your part.
We meet Nadia Maroney, and who I assume is their son in this scene, as his wife tells him what type of man she believes Oz is, but ultimately he can still be controlled. Now Saul and Oz make a deal, and that deal is that he'll claim the hit on Al, and Oz will make good on the drops that he promised and has to work with one of Sal's men who will be running point on this hit job. We see Oz gives them the full details of how they can pull off this hit job of the Falcone family. Now it's supposed to be a simple job with Oz being the trail guy on this run. Now for the first time in this series, we hear Johnny calling Oz
Penguin.
as Johnny forces Oz on the truck, the same one that the drops are on and the same one that's about to be robbed, making this situation more complicated. As they hit the streets, we see Maroney's men pulling up and they get the plans in motion as Oz has to make a quick move to avoid getting shot and distracts the men inside the truck, which he eventually does, as we see the Falcone's body drop and even Oz has to take some out on his own. Now during this shootout, we see the driver isn't dead and actually shoots at Oz but misses and hits the point man on this job, and we're to assume that he's dead. Now this causes Oz to pivot and make his way out of the truck to rejoin the forces of the Falcone and Sophia's head security to make appearances seem like he's on their side, as they have to regroup and retreat, leaving the truck there for the Maroneys to claim their prize, but having lost men in the process. This to me is a perfect example of what I'm excited to see for the rest of the season, and that is Oz pivoting from one side to the other, as he continues to show us how quick he is on his feet to make sure that he survives by any means necessary. Sophia arrives to hearing the news about the hit job, as we see that Johnny's pissed and only concerned about the product and the money being taken. Now Sophia steps in and reminds them that the money is easy to replace, but it's the embarrassment shown against their family after what was done to Al, and that is the key. That is more important, and Oz agrees with her in this moment, which to me is the start of him slowly getting Sophia on his side, as she tells them,
Look, Sophia, we all cared for Alberto.
Well, I doubt that, Milosh. I really do. Justice is what matters, and that is what my brother, your nephew, deserves.
Now Sophia smells a rat within their operation as Johnny pushes back and tells her that she doesn't have the right to make that call, nor does she call the shots. In this moment, you can see the wheels running in Oz's head, as he's 100% gonna play on this tension between Johnny and Sophia. As we meet Luca, who is now the new Don, who reminds Johnny to stay in his place, as we watch Johnny apologizes to Sophia. Now Luca is someone that's very ambitious in the comics, and he believes that he can get away and do whatever he wants, and it seems like he's gonna do the same thing in this very show. Now Luca playing the part as he tells Sophia to stand behind and tells her that he wants her to focus on laying her brother to rest. Meanwhile, he'll be handling the family business moving forward, and he'll look into finding this rat that Sophia believes is in their family organization. Now Oz, the opportunist, waits for Sophia outside to let her know that what happened between them in last week's episode is now water under the bridge. As we watch Oz plant the seeds for her to take over the family business, as he tells her,
Because it should be you in there calling the shots. You should be the new boss, not Carmine's little brother.
Careful.
Yeah, careful, whatever. So I shouldn't say it. So what? Al is dead. I left him too. More than those pricks. And look, if one of them had a hand in it, well, who's to say you ain't next? They didn't care about Al. They sure as shit don't like you. They think you're crazy, but you don't need me telling you that. You can feel it.
Now Oz also leans into the belief that there's a rat amongst them and that she's got the card to play to force the power to her side. Now that power card is Al's new drug, as he tells her that this will keep her brother's hope and dream alive. Now Sophia, as they say, she looks right through his BS and she isn't taking the bait, as she tells him,
Very, very convenient that all of a sudden you're on my side. Will you look at that? Right? My little helper.
All right.
You are scrambling for whatever dignity you have left, and you're hoping I will save you. Not gonna happen. I don't know you.
Well, you're right, you don't. I owe you.
I absolutely love the dynamic between these two characters. It's one of my favorite elements of the show, but the question remains, what will it take for Oz to gain Sophia's confidence and trust? Well, that will come full circle by the end of this episode. Now we get this quick scene of Oz talking to Victor about what just happened, and you'll notice that Vic stops and looks at this missing sign. Now I couldn't tell which one exactly caught his eye, but I think the point of this scene was to show that he's maybe got family looking for him after the floods, and we see him getting a text asking if he's okay and where he's at that he ignores later in this episode. So maybe Vic didn't lose everything back at Crown Point, but instead he used the flood as a way to start his life over and never wants to go back home. Now let's stick with Oz and Vic here for a little bit, as Oz wants to make an inside man and a rat, as we see that rat will be Johnny, something that I mentioned in my breakdown last week. Now we hear some backstory about how Oz got involved with the mob family, as he taught himself how to drive in less than 2 days in order to work for this mobster by the name of Pinchy, who ended up getting killed by Carmine, but Carmine actually kept Oz around and the rest is history. Now within this same scene, we see Oz invites over some girls, including Eve. Now the important lesson that Oz gave Vic within this story, and that is things get done no matter what, which is something that comes back a little bit later on. Now Oz has gathered over some of the Falcone goons to throw a party for making it out of the attacks alive, but also to mourn those who were killed. Now I want you all to notice the smart move that Oz does in throwing this party, because to me this is him showing his loyalty to these men, but also getting them on his side and to build morale, in that when push comes to shove and when he goes to push for power, these same men will remember little things like this, and they will feel like Oz is one of them and he didn't just get the power handed to him from the family. I love the comic book references in this interaction between the cam girl named Roxy, who was introduced to Vic, as they're talking about Crown Point, as she says,
I'm from Crown Point.
Yeah, my cousin lived over there. She said it's like a no man's land now or something.
Now, to me, this is a play on the comic book character Roxy Rocket, who was created in 1994 for the Batman Adventures Annual 1. Now, in the comics, Roxy was actually a character who stole jewels for Penguin. So we'll see if she'll ever return to play that role later on in this universe. But another little comic book reference I want to bring up is when Roxy is talking to Victor and she mentions that Crown Point is a no man's land. Now, for my comic book readers out there, Batman No Man's Land was a storyline that ran in the late 90s and basically followed and covered the aftermath of all the earthquakes that hit Gotham, similar to the floods in the Batman film. Now back with Oz, who's overlooking the photos he took from Carmine's safe, that was the photos of Johnny that we'll talk about later, as Eve walks in and wants to talk to Oz about why he needed an alibi, and she knows exactly what he did. Now within this conversation, it's clear as day that Eve is very aware of what Oz does on his day-to-day routine, as Oz tries to calm her nerves by telling her that he's handling everything and how he's gonna have Johnny be the fall guy. Oz just wants her to trust him, and once he's got control, he tells her that he'll be opening up another club for her and her girls to be a part of as entertainment. Like I mentioned in my breakdown last week, I believe this relationship between Oz and Eve will be very important. Now I'm just curious of who's going to turn on each other first. Will Eve turn on him, or will he turn on Eve? Either way, it seems like they're in love, but again, I wonder how much love they're going to have when things really hit the fan. Now back with Sophia, who's in the car, where we learn that the crime has risen over 42% in Gotham since the flooding hit. Again, this is the show giving us more understanding and reasoning to believe that Batman's got his hands full during Oz's rise to becoming the kingpin of Gotham.
It's a big city. I can't be everywhere.
Now the people on the radio talk about the releasing of inmates from Arkham, as they directly mention Sophia, aka the Hangman. For those that aren't aware, in the comics, Sophia Falcone was first introduced in the amazing story of The Long Halloween. Now in that story, Sophia is one of the few who survived the mass murder spree that killed many of her family members, one that was committed by her own brother, who later became known as the Holiday Killer. Now in the comics, Sophia, aka the Hangman, would target several police officers of the GCPD instead of the women like they're doing in the show, which I have a theory that I want to share with you all. What if Sophia's taken the fall and taken on this Hangman mantra because she's covering for her brother, or maybe even her father? You'll remember that in the Batman, Carmine Falcone killed someone by strangling them and also tried to kill Catwoman by strangling her but didn't get away with it, which again makes me think, what if Sophia is not actually the Hangman, but she's covering for her brother or her father? We get another Riddler reference at the bar where a detective is looking to get some drops, but due to the floods, the drop business is suffering from a drought. Sophia overhears this conversation with the detective, who's looking to score some drops, as we find out that he used to work for her father. Now this detective is labeled as someone who's dependable and good at finding snakes before he became an addict. Sophia gives him some drops and money, and in exchange, he'll look into this recent hit on the products to find this rat. Next morning, we see Sophia is awoken by this nightmare that looked to be her choking, which may be her ties to being called the Hangman. You'll notice that she's sleeping on the floor in her closet and not in her own bed, most likely her having a hard time reacclimating herself to normal day life. Sophia notices she scratched up her neck while she was asleep, leaving marks on her neck. Again, I believe that we're going to get the full backstory on if she is indeed the real Hangman. Now Oz gets a call from from his landlord Caesar, who tells him that his mother was wandering off in the streets, confirming that she's suffering from dementia. We see that Oz's Spanish is pretty damn good, and we remember this from the Batman with the whole scene of
You are El Rat that says that?
Why? You got something to tell us?
Yeah! It's like the worst Spanish I ever heard.
What?
It's La Rata.
As the landlord suggests that his mother needs permanent care, we see that Oz pays him to keep his suggestions to himself as he walks out and looks at Vic and tells him to be careful around Oz. We get this really nice sentimental dance between son and mother as she tells him,
I'm working on it. If my son isn't nothing, what am I?
as he promises her he won't let her down. Now, it's important to remember in this scene that Oz put on some jazz while dancing with his mom. Now, at the funeral where Oz shows up at the very last minute, we see that people are outside with signs saying to send Sophia back to Arkham as Oz fails to get Luca the dirt on Johnny as planned. But as they say, as one door closes, the other one opens, as we see that he sees Sophia inside by herself. She has a smoke. We see Oz shares what I speculated about in my last breakdown about what happened to his brothers not being alive, as Oz tells her that her brothers didn't get a proper funeral because his mother didn't want to have any pity on herself. As we get the call back to where his love from jazz stems from after his mother took him to a live band after weeks of being bedridden after losing her sons, Jack and Benny. I hope you guys really noticed the game of chess that Oz is playing in this very scene. You'll notice that Sophia took interest in the story and asked a few questions about what led to his mom taking him out to the club, and you'll see that Oz responds by saying that she never got to tell him why she did that before she passed. Now, we as an audience clearly know that his mother's still alive, but he wants Sophia to know that she's dead because if push comes to shove, someone like Sophia would use his mom against him. I'm pretty confident in saying that I don't believe Oz is going to be able to keep this secret away from her, and hell, maybe even Victor will tell Sophia about his mother. But putting that aside for a second, I want to go back to his brothers not being alive. Was Oz there? Did Oz have anything to do with his brother's death? What about his mom? Did his mom have anything to do with it? Or we don't know much about his father. Did his father die in the same way that his brothers did? Again, I think whatever happened will be very important to Oz's backstory. We watch, Oz continues to let her know what he said before in this episode that he meant. Now, Sophia gets a call from the detective about the rat. Meanwhile, Oz gets a text about someone wanting to meet with him. Now, before moving on, I think it's important to point out that I believe this story that Oz shared with her was a defining moment between Sophia and Oz. I believe that Sophia saw that she believes they have a lot more in common than she initially thought. She's under the impression that they both have lost their parents, but they also have lost siblings. This may be the moment that she actually wants to trust Oz. Now, the detective shows Sophia that Maroni's point man wasn't killed and he's under medication after getting shot, as the detective serves him up on a platter for Sophia to question him. Now, back with Oz at his meeting, we see that Nadia isn't happy about her man being pulled from the hospital and also how the robbery went, as she's about to have her men kill Oz. By the way, you notice they were going to stab him in the chest, something that Oz actually does later in this episode, but he stops them by telling him that he has something valuable in his possession. Now, we learn that the woman in the pictures with Johnny is actually Luca's wife, and they've been having an affair for years. Nadia takes this information, and it's safe to assume she's going to use this against the Falcones later on, but at the meantime, she wants Oz to get their point man out of the possession of the Falcones. Now, to me, it's crazy to know that Carmine Falcone actually knew that his brother's wife was cheating on him with Johnny, and he didn't say anything about that. To me, that just shows how messed up this family is. After the funeral, we see and hear all the people whispering about Sophia, who takes the opportunity to show her manners by eating the food with her hands and scoffing it down like she did in last week's episode. Oz and Vic arrive as Oz gives Vic a pep talk and sets the plan in motion to set up Johnny, but also getting Maroni Man out alive. As we watch this game of hide and go seek, as Sophia is keeping tabs on the point man to see if he's alive, as Oz finds Minos and Johnny and smartly makes them aware of the hostage situation in the basement that Sophia is holding up. Speaking of, we see Sophia sees this video of her and her brother when they were kids, kind of bringing back memories, as we get this brief awkward exchange with Sophia and her cousin, who's actually scared to have her around her little daughter, as Sophia tells the mother,
She's a real cutie, Carla. Yeah. Make sure you keep her protected. A young woman in this family might not end well for her.
I'll be honest with you all, I thought this scene was a little bit cheesy, and that's the scene where we see Vic outside when he almost gets caught but he escapes. But then I'm pretty sure that they saw his face, so I'm wondering if they're going to ever notice that that was the same kid and they're going to put two and two together at a later point in the season. Again, this was a quick scene, but it just felt so unserious, from the man randomly running outside chasing Vic to him running like the actual Flash or Michael Cera from Superbad. Now, Oz's plan to distract Sophia's main bodyguard away from the point man works, works as Oz finds him and tells him to tell Sophia that Johnny is the rat. But unfortunately, Oz gets the call from Vic that Johnny's diamond situation isn't going to work out, which causes him to change plans, leaving Oz to killing him violently, stabbing him in the chest the same way the Maronis were going to kill him. Now, Sophia and Luca find the body and gather up all their men, including Oz and Johnny, as they're looking for someone that's holding a knife. Now, as I was thinking, this is a perfect opportunity to plant the knife on him, but instead, we see Oz plants the knife on Sophia's bodyguard, who breaks up the fight. I want y'all to remember that Oz probably held a grudge against him from wiring his arm last week. Well, it looks like Oz got his revenge. Now, Sophia's bodyguard ends up getting shot, but Sophia wanted to kill him because she's under the belief that he was the rat, but Luca kills him instead because he made the call. Now, Luca wants Sophia to leave Gotham and go to Italy and claims it's for her own safety, as if she's not capable of taking care of herself. Now, you'll notice that Sophia's lost everyone close to her, including her bodyguard, who's now dead, which in return, with Luca doing this, he's pushing her further away from the family and closer to Oz and listening to his advice from earlier. Now, speaking of trust and taking advice, we see Oz and Vic are burying the body as Oz kicks Vic in the grave and tells him to lie in the dirt next to the dead bodies. Again, Oz gives him the lesson to do whatever it takes to get the job done by any means necessary. To me, this is definitely a big moment for the Vic character. Like, I believe this will definitely stick with him, but the question is, will this moment be a lesson learned by Vic? Will he never mess up again? Or will this be a breaking point? Will we see Vic maybe want to go back to his family? I guess time will tell. As we end this episode with Sophia calling a meeting with Oz, and we see that Oz planted the jewels that he wanted to put on Johnny, but he planted it on the security guard, the same diamonds that Oz took from Carmine's safe. We actually learned that these diamonds were pretty important because these were the diamonds that actually brought Al to the Iceberg Lounge the night of his death. He was going to use these diamonds as an investment for the new drug, but ultimately it was going to be for him and his sister to run the family business together, as she looks at Oz and tells him,
Roberta was taken from me, and I refuse to let these old fit men push me aside again like I'm nothing, so I'm going to take from them now. And I'm going to force them to their knees. It should be fun. What do you say, Oz? You in?
Let's dance.
You wanna know what's shameful, Vic?
Working your whole goddamn life, having nothing to show for it. Still think there's good and bad, right and wrong. There ain't. There's just this. Survival, security, pleasure. They don't give out awards for dying in the project.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my breakdown of The Penguin, episode 3, titled Bliss. This episode is all about people trusting Oz and him doing what he does best, and that's making him think that he's on their side. Whether it be him building up the trust with Sophia, all for him to leave her high and dry at the end of this episode, or him giving Vic life lessons and building his confidence up, all for him to break him down by the end of this episode as well, but he still manages to hook one of them back into his fold by the end. Let's get into this breakdown. Spoilers ahead. We open this episode with a flashback before the flooding of Gotham in the Batman. We get a glimpse into Vic's life before Oz, as he's got a girl, he's got a mom and a dad and a sister, and everything seems good. He comes from a good family with good morals, as we see him having this conversation with his dad about his father asking for more money at work and him wanting his father to just want to ask for more, which to me was setting up his aspirations of how we've seen Vic so far in the previous 2 episodes, of him wanting and yearning for more, and what he spoke to with Oz back in episode 1, as his father responds by telling him that he has more than enough and that they can get by from what they have so far in their life. Now, we can see that there seems to be some tension between Vic and his father as it pertains to who Vic is hanging out with, as we see him leaving home to hang out with his girls and his friends on a rooftop on the night of the election. Again, this conversation between him and his father, I think, highlights the idea behind Vic and him wanting to have this type of relationship with others who happen to be bad influence on him, again tying this into his connection with Oz. Now, on this rooftop with Vic's friends, and we see him with his girl talking about how he likes to be here, but we see that she wants to make it out of Crown Point. Now, I think we all kind of knew what was going to happen in this scene, as we know what happened with the Batman, with the Riddler and his final riddle for the bombs going off in Gotham, but seeing it from this perspective of Vic's character, a character we've been following for the last 2 weeks, and even though it was brief, we got to meet his family. So seeing the waters coming into the city, the flooding beginning to happen, definitely created this emotional connection between us as the audience and also to Vic as the character. As we cut back to present day, we see Oz is getting ready to meet up with his new partner Sophia, as Vic will will be their chauffeur for the night. Now, so far this season, especially in this episode, we've seen Oz giving Vic some life lessons and building up his confidence, especially in this scene after giving Vic some new clothes, giving him some new swagger, giving him $1,000 to work for him a week, and also him telling Vic that he has to know his worth. I'm gonna be honest with you all, I know you gotta start somewhere, but $1,000, Oz, that's all you can scrape up to give Vic, who's not only gotten rid of 1 but 3 bodies so far this season. He's also saved Oz from dying once, and we'll talk about what happens in this episode. But I mean, $1,000, Oz, like if I'm Vic in this position, I'm at least asking for at least $5,000 to $7,000 every other day. But that's just me. Back to the show, I love how this show sprinkles in comedy and how they do it in such a perfect way that doesn't take you away from like the serious tone of what the show's going for. Perfect example is that is where we see Oz getting the call from Blackgate, and we know Sophia's at the front door, and we see Oz leaving Vic to answering the door for her, and clearly he's nervous as hell to meet the hangman as Oz tells Vic,
Some time. Hold on, Oz, what if she asked me about her brother? Or Castillo? Just tell you had a hand in killing them both. See what happens.
Now we see Sophia and Vic officially meet for the first time this season as she looks around at Oz's, as she calls it, tacky place as they're making some small talk. Now again, it's clear as day that Vic is nervous as hell to be talking to Sophia, and you can't blame him, but in this conversation we find out a couple things as Sophia's kind of eyeing him up and trying to get some information about Victor, the mechanic, and getting his name and everything. But within this conversation we find out that Oz actually used to be Sophia's driver back in the day. Which, speaking of old times, we see Sophia makes a change of plans and she makes Oz drive them for the night, leaving Vic to hanging back and calling the person he's been avoiding calling back so far since last episode. As we check in with Sophia and Oz, we see that Sophia follows through with her brother's plans with using the jewels in exchange for this new drug that we see is being delivered through Arkham State Hospital containers. As it appears that Sophia was the one that actually set up this drug transaction, as it makes me think about what I mentioned in my last week breakdown involving Dr. Rush. Now, for those that might have missed my breakdown last week, what I talked about in that video was, what if Dr. Rush is this show's version or Matt Reeves' version of the Scarecrow, and what if he's been testing his drug on his patients, which we actually find out this was the case later in this breakdown. Now Oz meets the chemist who goes by the name of Trey Bloom, who shows him the operation behind this new drug that's being developed, and it used to be used on the patients of Arkham, as Oz believes that it's just this type of small party drug, but it's actually described as
the Basidio These are bleeding tooth fungi, a rare strain. The psychoactive compound in the sap creates a potent euphoric stimulant. It's a completely different high.
Again, could this be the beginnings of Scarecrow fear toxin within this universe? As we see Sophia giving the task to Oz to finding them a distributor. Now back with Vic, we see that he invites his girl over to Oz's place, and after catching up, we do get the confirmation that both of these characters have lost their families in the flood, and we also find out that his girlfriend is wanting to move to California, and she wants to be leaving within the next 24 hours, and she wants him to go with her. Now Vic tells his girlfriend about half of the truth of who his boss is and what he's been doing, as he says that he's seen some things that will prevent him from leaving. Now, Oz is headed back to his place as Vic gives his girl some cash and tells her that he's going to try to figure out a way to tell Oz that he wants to leave to go with her to California. Now back with Sophia and the Falcones, we see that they're laying low after recent events as Johnny not so nicely gives Sophia her ticket to Italy as requested by her uncle Luca. Now Johnny's getting really bold around Sophia as he shares his thoughts on how he feels about her.
I know you're not right in the head. I mean, that's pretty damn clear. But I'm not scared of you. All I see is a spoiled bride who got what she deserved.
So not only does he share his true feelings about how he feels about Sophia, but he also gives her 2 days to gather up all her things and to leave to Italy, or else he'll be telling people that that's where she went, basically threatening to kill and get rid of Sophia. I don't know about y'all, but I would not be threatening Sophia, who goes by the name of the Hangman. That's wild to me. But I'm telling you right now, whether it's Oz or now Sophia, Johnny will 100% get killed in the most horrific way when it comes to his death, sometime I would imagine in this season. Now as we see Oz getting his plan into motion with the triad deputy by the name of Link, they want to begin their process of getting an authorized partnership to start pushing this new drug by the name of Bliss. Now, one of my favorite elements about this particular episode was seeing Oz and Sophia working together, as we have in this scene them talking to Link about this operation. It was just so great because Oz, as we know that he does, lies about everything. As he talks about having the blessing from the Falcone family and he mentions Johnny's involvement, you'll notice how Sophia is just rolling her eyes at him the whole time, just kind of playing along with his lies. But secretly, I love how Oz even even though it kind of seems like things feel random or he's just saying things that come to the top of his mind, but he's so smart in bringing up Johnny, because again, this is just setting Johnny up for obviously the relationship he has with Luca's wife, obviously the beef and tension that Oz knows that he has with Sophia. So throwing Johnny into the mix, so if things do kind of fall apart, again, it's going to all kind of tie around to Johnny being the bad one, Johnny being the rat, Johnny being the one sleeping with his wife. So again, things might seem random when Oz does things like this in this scene, but again, he's always like this super calculated and he's like 10 steps ahead of everybody. Now, to prove Oz's word, Link wants him to get confirmation from Johnny himself over the phone to his boss, as the plan is to have a trial run for the night at this club with an audience to see if things go smooth, and if they do, they'll get closer to going into business with this boss who is a bigger fish in this game, and to position themselves as a new fourth within Gotham and to move closer to Sophia taking over the family business. Meanwhile, while all this is going down, outside we see Vix in Oz's car watching over the bliss. He's also coming up with lines and practicing what he's going to say to Oz in regards to him leaving Gotham. While he's doing that, we see Gotham's finest asking Vic to step out of the car. Now, to avoid to get busted with the bliss in the back seat and to get in trouble, we see Vic taking lessons from Oz. He's thinking quick on his feet as he gives the officer his weekly allowance, and that allows the officer to walk away without him getting into trouble. Now, as I mentioned earlier, this episode really put an emphasis on showing Oz really building Vic up, as we head to the scene with him and Vic having this really earnest conversation and an honest conversation with one another as they're at this restaurant. Now, in this conversation, we see Vic shares what his parents used to do for a living. And again, just notice how Oz is trying to play this role of a mentor or this big brother / boss to Vic, and he wants Vic to start trusting him. He wants him to, again, building a confidence and having the server being corrected of not allowing Vic to talk with his stutter and just having him building himself up. Again, Oz is so smart in manipulating people into making them believe in him and to trust in him. Now, we find out that they're not just going out to eat to enjoy each other's company. We see that Oz, again, is part of his plan, as we see that he wants to speak to Tina, who we find out is Luca's wife. Now, ultimately, we see Tina gives Oz the key to the room where her and Johnny will hook up, I assume, on a regular basis, as Oz and Sophia confront Johnny and make him fall in line with their plans and having Sophia replacing Luca. Now, Johnny, being Johnny, begins talking smack to Oz about the lack of trust people have towards him, as we see that this is clearly getting under Oz's skin. But the thing that takes him over the edge is we see that Johnny calls him the Penguin yet again, but he also makes it in a way that you're only used for entertaining purposes only, which brings out that impulsive nature of Oz as he shoves the phone in Johnny's mouth, forcing him to call, or else he's going to tell Luca about the affair, which we know he doesn't want that to happen. So ultimately, Johnny makes the call. He's now kind of working with Sophia and Oz in order to make things smooth over. But again, I just love when we get to see Oz just having his impulse taking the best of him, his instinctive nature getting the best of him. And during that whole scene, Sophia not saying much of a word, she's just so perfect. Her charisma, her presence is just so great. But I have to admit, I love seeing Oz shoving that phone in Johnny's mouth and making him shut the hell up. Now at the club, we see Oz has his team assembled, as we see they're going to start spreading out the bliss to the fine people of Gotham, as Vic is being the bag man. Again, we see Oz prepping him up, building him up. I want you all to notice Sophia sees Oz kissing Eve, and to me, that is Sophia paying attention to her surroundings, keeping this in her memory bank just in case she has to use Eve against Oz at some point later down the season. And how Oz is kind of gloating over this situation as she has to remind Oz who's in charge of the situation, as they talk about what happened between them 10 years ago, which involves Oz being the one that told Carmine that Sophia needed to go. More on that situation a little bit later. Now, as the conversation is going on with the adults, we check in with Vic, and I'll be honest with you all, seeing Vic as the bag man and seeing how the scene played out in the club, was it me, or did this scene kind of feel like I was watching Arrow, which I used to love Arrow, but after a while it got a little bit cheesy, but it felt like I was watching a CW show. It was clearly my least favorite moment of the episode, just seeing the scene play out, especially when Vic, and I get what the show's doing. When we see Vic and his flashbacks to the nights of the flood and him having a panic attack, again, I understand, I respect the perspective of Vic, because honestly, Vic is the character that is the only one that's not completely corrupted, as we see the corruption is starting to change him, especially in this episode, and changing his morals. But his side story wasn't the best part of this show to me as far as this episode goes, compared to seeing Sophia and Oz and them building their relationship in the episode. That was the key and the best moments, but every time we would check into Vic, it just felt off. Which, speaking of, we see Sophia talking to the head boss about how this drug will be used.
That's why they gave it to us in Arkham. It made us content, submissive. Any pain that we had just floated away, allowing us to forget where we were. It's a very powerful drug, and whoever controls it will control the future of the drug trade in Gotham.
Now again, we do get confirmation in the scene that Bliss was used on the patients of Arkham. And again, it seems to me that this show is setting up Dr. Rush to maybe being involved. And again, I could be wrong, but I think this might be the show's version of Scarecrow. Or at the very least, they're at least planting the seeds for this drug being like counter-programmed to becoming that fear toxin later on in the actual Batman movies. Now ultimately the deal ends up getting made. Meanwhile, we see Vic and Oz having this falling out in the bathroom. We see Oz sees Vic texting his girl and talking about leaving, which leads to them having this confrontation as Oz is telling Vic that he is squandering this opportunity to be better and to have more than his father ever had. Now as they're having this confrontation, Vic ultimately kind of leads up to this point where he feels like he's being held hostage, which is the complete opposite of how Oz feels about the situation that they've been under in the last 2 episodes. As Oz throws it back in Vic's lap as he says that he could have left at any point, but he wanted to stay because he wanted more, he wanted better. As Vic tells Oz that his father wouldn't approve of this lifestyle. Now to Vic, and to honestly my surprise, we see that Oz allows him to walk out, which Vic leaves, and we see that Vic uses that confidence he's been building this episode, and he ultimately takes Oz's car. We get this kind of weird moment in the episode where the characters are pondering. We see that Vic goes to the bus station, he ultimately decides to stay. Meanwhile, we see Oz at the bar kind of thinking about what just happened. And this episode was just so melodramatic to me. Going back to my favorite part of this episode, and that's Sophia and Oz as they have it out and have this conversation about him being the reason she went to Arkham, and the things getting really emotional between these two characters. We get some truth from both characters and them removing their egos as we learn that Sophia isn't the hangman, which I talked about in my last video, which again makes me think that she was covering up from either her brother or her actual father, who were probably the real hangman and killing these women, most likely her father more than her brother. As we see Oz like finally legitimately being honest with someone as he tells her that he doesn't regret what he did and sending her to Arkham, because at the end of the day he got what he really wanted in life. And you'll notice again the emotional depths that these characters going through. At least from my perspective, Sophia was being earnest and being genuine. We see both of the characters somewhat getting teary-eyed in this scene. Again, I think Sophia was being 100% honest in this conversation, and I do believe that Oz was being 50-50 in this moment as well. As she says to Oz,
I don't know where to go from here. I don't know how to trust you.
But I keep showing you how.
but look, at the end of the day, this is Gotham, and there's no time for truths to be revealed left and right, and honest conversations and earnest conversations, as we see Nadia pulls up with her men who have guns in their hands pointed at Sophia and Oz. Now, Vic ultimately comes back to the club, and yet again, he's been learning from Oz to think quick on his feet, to have those instincts, as he saves Oz yet again by hitting a man who's pointing a gun at them. As we see, Oz hops in a car, and this was such a big moment for me because after building this trust with Sophia, essentially, he leaves her there as we see him leaving her behind. And my question is, what now?
They think I'm broken. I'm not broken. I'm not the one who's sick. The world is. You're right. I deserve a fresh start.
Welcome back, everyone. This is my breakdown of The Penguin episode 4 titled Shaitani. For me, this episode completely flips the show on its head as we get to look into Sophia's past and find out the true identity of the Hangman. After this episode ended, I think we have a new character to root for moving forward. We got a lot to get into, full spoilers ahead. We open this episode with seeing the moment before Vic arrived with the exchange between Oz and Nadia while Sophia watches as she learns that Oz was working with the Maronis and that he also killed her brother Al. You'll notice how everything just stops around Sophia after hearing this news as she watches Oz just talking his mouth off and just knowing that she should have never trusted him. We watch as Oz is pleading to Nadia and shares his plans with her on why he's working with Sophia as we catch up to the point in which we see Vic come in. In the midst of all the chaos, Sophia manages to escape but hits her head but still manages to call Julian before passing out. Before we get into breaking down Sophia's backstory at Arkham, I just have to say this now. These scenes added so much depth and understanding to her character, and oh my goodness, the performance by Cristin was nothing short of phenomenal. As we flash back to a much different time in Sophia's life as she's introduced as the chairman of her mother's foundation. Now in the speech that Sophia gives, we find out that her mother, Isabella, suffered from depression, and when she was 9, she took her own life. Or that's what Sophia's been told and led to believe. Now in this scene, we see a young Oz and Sophia have somewhat of a respectable and great relationship as her driver. Now Sophia even knows that Oz's job as a driver isn't the best job out there, but she even acknowledges the fact that she thinks of them as being underappreciated individuals. Now as she awaits Oz, she's introduced to a woman who wants Sophia's help in piecing together a mystery of women taking their lives by hanging, similar to Sophia's mom, but the thing is, all these women worked at the Iceberg Lounge for her father. Now this exact conversation brings Sophia to a memory when she was 9, and we see that she was the one that actually found her mother's body. Now we cut to seeing our first appearance of Carmine Falcone alive as we see that Sophia is definitely the most trusted and reliable one in their father's eyes, as Carmine tells her that one day he wants to pass the family business over to her. Sophia tells her father about working so closely with the foundation has brought up these memories of her mother as she goes and sharing how she never really remembered her mother ever being depressed or sick. We can clearly see her father is dodging the questions and wants to avoid this directly as he tells her,
Your mother was a proud woman, stubborn. She refused my help. Sophia, why would you do this now? Picking away at old wounds. You know how it upsets me.
Now we cut to the next scene where we find Oz driving Sophia and Al, and you'll notice in this moment that Al was disrespecting Oz by calling him the Penguin, but again, we get to see a little bit of that friendship between Sophia and Oz as she's protecting him by telling her brother to not call him that. Now, against her father's wishes to stop picking at old wounds, we see Sophia is asking her brother if he knew anything about those women that worked for her father at the club and questions if he really knows who their father is. Now, you'll notice that Oz is listening very carefully to this conversation, which to me just kind of points to the fact that he knew all about the Hangman. Now, instead of getting things prepared for her father's birthday, we see Sophia has Oz take her to meet with Summer Gleason, who works for the Gotham Gazette. Now, for my Batman animated fans out there, you'll remember that Summer Gleason was someone that was very important to the Gotham scene. She was considered one of the biggest celebrities and a media figure in that TV series. Now, Summer shows Sophia the evidence and how all these women's deaths are all connected in the sense that they didn't just die by hanging, but instead they were strangled. Now, Summer wants Sophia to either wear a wire to her father's club or at the very least give her access to the club so she can uncover the truth. Again, we see that this exact conversation leads Sophia to remembering more about the day that she found her mother, as we see her father comes in to shield her from finding her mother, and she notices that there's scratches on his hands and there's also marks under her mother's fingernails, which to me was just confirmation of the theory I shared with you all weeks ago that Carmine is actually the Hangman. Now we see Sophia's pushing back against these allegations that her father has anything to do with these women's death, and more importantly, we see Sophia is in denial and she couldn't fathom the idea of her father being a murderer. Now, another important thing to point out during these scenes is we see that Oz is telling Sophia that meeting with a member of the press isn't a good look for the family. But we know that she obviously didn't listen to Oz in this moment, and this to me was basically the moment Oz knew that it was time to tell her father what she did, and we know that this is the moment that that would change Sophia's life forever. Now, one of the elements that I loved about this episode is how much we got to see a different side of Sophia before entering Arkham. We even have this friendly interaction between Sophia and her cousin Carla as they're talking about Luca marrying his third wife, which I'm assuming is the wife that we see in the present day that's cheating on him with Johnny. And again, a much different vibe than when we saw these two at her brother's funeral a few episodes ago. Now, going back to what Oz tried to tell Sophia in the car, as we see that her father calls her in his office to confront her. And it's clear as day that Oz is the one that shared this information with Carmine. Now, we get this Batman reference from Carmine in this scene, and we also see this character a little bit later as Carmine name drops Kinsey, who you all will remember was in the Batman film and also got his nose broken by Batman and also saved by him after Selina almost killed him. Sophia mentions to her father the scratches she found on his hand that day that she found her mother, and you can see the nervousness and the fear in her voice when she's asking for reinsurance from him, as he tells her that she's confused and that she's sick and she needs to return home immediately. Now, a question I have for you all in the comments is, what exactly did Sophia's mom Isabella say or do, or what did she find out about her husband to make him kill her? I wonder if that's ever going to be revealed in this season. Did Isabella find out that he had a love child in the name of Selina? Did she find out that he was killing other women? Again, I'm just so curious to find out if we'll learn what Isabella learned about Carmine to end up leading to her death. Now, in the car, we see Oz tries to apologize, and the only reason he did this and told her father was to protect her. He's doing his job. He's looking out for her and her best interests. Now, as they're driving, we see Kinsey and some other officers pull them over and have Sophia step out of the car, and they arrest her for the murder of the reporter, but also they arrest her for the murder of the other woman that was killed. Now, Oz seems to be just as surprised as Sophia in this moment, which makes me question, do you all think that Oz knew that she was going to actually get arrested? Again, I know last week he said that he didn't know that she was going to go to Arkham, but I don't really trust Oz. But again, do you all think that Oz knew that this exact moment was going to happen in regards to Kinsey and the police? Let me know your thoughts on that in the comments below. But again, this just goes back to the thing I love about this episode. It just gives us so much context to episodes 1, 2, and 3 with the conversations of Oz and Sophia initially talking about, I know why you did that in episode 1, and obviously in last week's episode, them talking about this exact moment. It just adds so much more depth and context to these characters and their relationship. Now, we get a chance to see exactly how fast and how much power Carmine has, as all the articles are already calling out Sophia as the hangman, and her father is now saying that she has a history with mental illness. Sophia learns that her entire family, minus her brother, is backing the claims that she is ill, which to me, again, just points to her father being such a cruel man. Now, Sophia learns that she's being sent to Arkham for 6 months till she faces trial. Now, I'm gonna say I don't think Al wanted any of this for his sister, but I do have a question. Do you all think that Al knew about the women that was killed? Did he know the truth about his mother, or is he innocent in this situation? What do you all think? Does Al know? Does he not know? I mean, some part of me tells me that he doesn't know because he seems to be kind of the dumb one, doesn't really pay attention to too many things and doesn't really dive deep into things, but he might be fearful of his father and kept his secrets to keep his sister safe. But again, let me know if you all think Al knew or he didn't know in the comments below. We watch as Sophia is being brought into Arkham and loses any and all of her freedom and power that she once held. Here's where she meets the doctors and she meets Julian Rush, and where she learns that she won't be having any visitors while she's spending 6 months in Arkham. And could you imagine just one day you're free and you have your whole life in front of you, and the next thing you know, you're being thrown into an asylum by your own damn father? Now, inside Arkham Asylum, we see Sophia meets a new friend who, I'm not gonna lie, I thought that was a child. By the way, their voice was so high-pitched, and honestly, for like a split second, I thought that this was gonna be the show's version of Harley Quinn, but then I quickly realized that makes no sense. Now, this new friend goes by the name of Magpie, and it sounds like she killed her own stepmother, which led her into going to Arkham. Now, for my comic fans out there, Magpie does come from the comics. She's known as a jewel thief, and she first appeared in the Man of Steel issue 3 that dropped in November of 1986. As we cut to the next day, where Sophia is immediately greeted by the other inmates in the lunchroom welcoming the hangman. We watch as Magpie shows her excitement for the med she's gonna get, which is the same drug that Sophia used to make the bliss. As Sophia meets another inmate, one in particular who is unchained, and confronts her about killing those women and begins beating Sophia and beats her up so bad that she eventually knocks her out. As we watch Julian and Sophia have their first official conversation, as Sophia believes that the attack was coordinated and that she tells him that her father set her up for the murders. As Julian claims that he's only here to help her out and nothing else, setting up for him being the only person that she can possibly trust. As we continue to see the corruption within Gotham, but in particular the corruption within Arkham and Carmine's influence, as Sophia is brought back to the lunchroom and forced to take out the woman who attacked her in front of the guards and the head doctor. Now Sophia doesn't take the bait and she drops the fork that she was given, and we see the woman actually picks up the fork and stabs herself in the neck, ending her time being tortured at Arkham. As we get these sets of scenes showing us Sophia is being put under extreme levels of shock therapy sessions without her consent, as we see this is a consistent thing that she's going to go through day in and day out. As we see her slowly losing herself each time as she's trying to get through to Julian to make this stop. Now we see over time that her dreams are becoming nightmares as she sees herself ending up like her mother, which explains why we saw her waking up with those panic attacks grabbing her neck after her nightmares, similar to the scene that we saw her in a closet back in episode 2. Now Sophia finally gets a visitor, and it's her brother Al, and this is the exact scene that we saw in the opening of episode 2 with him visiting her from her therapy session. Now Al tells her the unfortunate news that she will not be getting a trial because the head doctor at Arkham told the judge that she's unfit to stand trial. Now after getting the terrible news, we see Sophia is just completely broken and completely hopeless at this point. As she enters the lunchroom, as Julian apologizes for what just happened, as Magpie is happy to know that she's going to have a friend now that's going to be here for a while, as she tells her that she can now get the candy, as we watch Sophia begins to think that Magpie might be a spy and working for the doctor. Now in a moment of rage, we see Sophia bashes Magpie's face into the metal table, killing her, and we see that Sophia gets put down. Now we don't see any more of her time at Arkham, and I do wonder if we'll ever revisit her time again in this season, especially the moment that she actually got out. Now we cut back to the present time where Julian found her after she called him. As Sophia has no allies, and after Oz's betrayal, she only has 1 day left to leave to Sicily, and she has no options left. As Sophia confronts Julian about their time at Arkham and the control that he had over her during that time. As Sophia just wants to get the truth about why he's helping her and not getting anything in return. As we find out that Julian eventually left Arkham, leaving Sophia there, and he even had help in getting her out. As Sophia believes that he only is helping her now because of his guilt, as this to me is the exact moment Sophia knew exactly what she had to do to get her fresh start. As Sophia returns home to all the people she called family and betrayed her as she walks in on the family dinner celebration for Luca. As Luca gives a family speech, we see Sophia interrupts him and shares her own speech instead. As she repeats all the names of the women that she was accused of murdering, and she also shares what it feels like to be betrayed by the one she loved, but it's now time for new beginnings. We watch as Sophia takes a smoke, and it's important to notice whose room she's in, and that's Johnny, and she also leaves the window open. As Sophia takes the only innocent person left inside this house, as she takes her niece outside to eat some cake, and this is something that she used to do with Al when they were younger. As she tells her niece about the story of what happened to her and why she had to fight against her monsters. As we cut to the next morning to see Sophia wearing a mask, and was it just me or her wearing this yellow dress and sleeping in the greenhouse? Was anyone else thinking that this is giving off some Poison Ivy vibes? Wouldn't it be pretty crazy if Matt Reeves makes Sophia into the Poison Ivy in his Batverse? As she has gotten rid of her monsters by killing everybody in the house by poisoning them by releasing some type of toxins within the air vents, but again, she left the window open in Johnny's room, keeping him alive for them to talk, most likely for her to talk about how she's gonna now officially be taking over the family business, but also how they're gonna set up to killing Oz. Now, was this a smart move by Sophia by her killing off the most important members left in her family? Will she maybe use this as a bargaining tool to maybe join forces with the Maronis?
My father's legacy is dead, and we will never speak his name again. From this point on, I am a Gigante, and this is a new family now.
Okay, Sophia, let's not be rash here. These gentlemen know we got a score we need to settle.
Welcome back, everybody. This is my breakdown of The Penguin episode 5 titled Homecoming. Man, this episode was all about these characters reclaiming what's theirs and leaving some bodies behind in the process. As Oz kills some key members of the Maroney's family, and Sophia kills Johnny while claiming her mother's name. We had some major moves that went down in this episode, so let's get into this breakdown, full spoilers ahead. We open with Oz torching his purple car and talking to Vic about Rex Calabrese and how he would see Rex driving around the neighborhood and how it made him feel and how it made him motivated as we watch Oz puts his car to rest. As Oz continues to talk to Vic, he doesn't see Sophia as a threat as Vic apologizes for wrecking his whip as Oz tells him,
You and me now, kid. Till the end. Anytime we got ourselves some goddamn respect.
Now Oz calls his boys to pick him up and fills them in on how things will operate as he tells them about the bliss, but the Maroneys are in his way. As he shares with them a TikTok video of Sal's kid Taj, who's next in line and taking over the family business, as he's flexing online, and in doing so, he unknowingly shares his location and where he's getting tatted. As Oz and his crew find him and take him, and this is all a part of Oz's new plan. As Oz heads back to Blackgate to show Sal and Nadia that he has their son, and we see Oz immediately has his attention as they get straight to business. Now it's a pretty simple deal. We see Oz just wants his bliss back. In exchange, he'll give them back their son. Now Nadia doesn't trust Oz as Saul promises that they'll be ready for anything that he throws at them as Oz interrupts them and they make the deal. Now unfortunately, little does Saul know this was the last time he's going to be seeing his wife. Now as Oz is leaving Blackgate, he comes across a guard and we see what he tells him a little bit later in this episode. Now as he leaves, he's watching the television, sees the breaking news of what happened to the Falcones, and he sees that Sophia is one of the only survivors. Again, underestimating her is one of the biggest mistakes that Oz can make. Now we cut to the scene where Sophia watches Gia being taken in by a children's home, and basically this to me is like passing on the traumatic experiences she had losing her mother as a kid, but unlike Sophia who had Al on her side, Gia's lost everybody. I am curious if we'll ever check back in with Gia because if I'm not mistaken, I believe she is a character from the comics who ends up taking over the Falcone family many years down the road when she grows up. Now for my Batman fans out there, we get another character from that film as we are reintroduced to Chief Mackenzie Bach, who's questioning what happened. Now Sophia makes up a story about a family fight involving Luca and Johnny and him discovering that his wife was possibly having an affair, and Sophia says that she was told to take Gia outside, which explains why her and Sophia were the only survivors. Now we find out that Johnny is missing and Sophia doesn't know his whereabouts as she continues to play on this act. Now Bach is very suspicious of the whole situation as Sophia responds to his suspicions by telling him,
Tell me, is it common for the chief of police to respond to house calls? Hope you didn't come to my home to throw my family's death in my face.
The whole angle of Johnny missing is so smart on Sophia's part because it makes it seem like he could be used as a scapegoat in this whole situation, making it look like he's the one that had a hand in these deaths. Which, speaking of Johnny, we see Sophia has him caged up where her family rests as she pays him a visit. Now Sophia is looking for the untraceable cash that her father had, but Johnny isn't willing to give up the goods so easily because he knows once she gets the money, he's most likely a dead man, which we end up seeing a little bit later. So to expedite this process, we see Sophia pours ice cold water on him and making him understand a sense of urgency because he won't last long in this current situation about how cold it gets down there. Now taking a little sidebar for a second, now I've accepted the fact that Batman will not be in the show according to Matt Reeves himself, but I mean come on, Batman would not be looking into these deaths? Even with Carmine gone, the Falcones are still one of the most powerful families in Gotham. Now look, I know it's daytime, we get a lot of daytime scenes in this show, which means that Bruce is probably asleep while this is all happening, and also he's getting his rest and recovering from the events after the Batman, but him being absent is becoming harder and harder to understand. Now we cut to Oz, who's got Taj at Eve's place as he tries to convince her that he's got everything under control and everything is going according to plan, but we see Eve isn't quick to falling into Oz's lies. Now we see the Falcones' ex-goons watch the news as they learn about their ex-employer is now dead, as Oz takes this opportunity to fill them in on their new situation.
The way I see it, Sophia done us a favor. One family down, one to go.
Now let's get back what belongs to us.
Oz only has Vic that he can trust as he wants him to get his mom and look over her, and he promises to keep her safe. Now, it's important to note in this conversation, the line where Oz says that his mom keeps him good and kind of keeps him grounded, to me, that's setting up a situation where something terrible will happen to her, and that being the reason why we see the most ruthless side of Oz. And hey, maybe Vic will be the one that he blames for if something does happen to his mother. Back with Sophia, who's taunting Johnny, he continues to withhold the information she needs for the untraceable cash. Now, last week, I posed a question on if we would ever find out exactly what Isabella did or said to get her killed by her own husband, as we see Johnny eventually spills the beans on what happened to Sophia's mom.
She was gonna leave him, you know? The night Isabella died. She was gonna leave Carmine.
We learned that Isabella couldn't take it anymore and she didn't want any more of this lifestyle, but more importantly, she didn't want to be Carmine's wife anymore. Now, Johnny regrets being the one to introduce Isabella, his cousin, to Carmine and feels somewhat responsible for her death at the hands of Carmine, but even with that, Sophia points out that Johnny remained loyal to him and he didn't leave. Johnny says that he couldn't save her mother, but he wants to help Sophia by getting her an army that will respect her and make her the queen of Gotham. Question for you all in the comments, do you all fully believe Johnny's story? Now, I know that's somewhat comic book accurate in regards to Isabella leaving Carmine Falcone, but do you think there's more to that story in regards to why she left? Do you think he actually feels bad for Isabella? And just let me know your thoughts about the overall story in the comments below. And in my notes, I had, do you all trust that Sophia can trust him? Well, that last part won't matter after what happens to Johnny a little bit later. Meanwhile, we see Vic is arriving to Mrs. Cobb's house, and when he finds her, she thinks that he's Oz at first, and she's showing him all these valuable items to what Oz used to play with and had as a kid. Eventually, he tells her who he is. Now, Vic fills her in on the whole crime family situation and tells her that Oz handled business.
Oz pulled this off. That's why I'm here right now, to make sure that you're safe.
Now, back at Blackgate, we see what Oz told that guard, which is to kill and assassinate Saul, and we see the scene taking place as he gets stabbed in the stomach, and we see this struggle between the two as we now know that Oz is setting his new plan into motion, which is getting rid of the Maroney's family. Which actually brings us into the meeting with Nadia. Clearly, the tensions are high as they make their exchange, as we see Oz tells Taj to go to his mommy, but we see this is all a setup by Sal's man who's now shooting at Oz. I'm not gonna lie, this was a pretty dumb idea by the Maroneys to not have them wait for Nadia to get Taj and get them out of harm's way, or at the very least make it seem like the exchange is going smooth to catch them off guard. So I just thought that whole plan by the Maroneys was pretty dumb. But I can forgive or forget the shortcomings in this scene or the dumb decision by the Maroneys, because we see that Taj was wet when they arrived, and we find out that the reason he was wet because he was covered in gasoline, as Oz and his guys take out the Maroney crew and Oz gets his lighter out, and like any loving mother, you see Nadia tries to shield her son Taj, but they end up both getting lit on fire and they both die. As Oz watches them die, this was all a part of his plan to have the Maroneys taken out, with Saul being killed in prison and taking out his wife and his son at the same damn time. Man, Oz is not playing any games. If you are in his way, he will take you out. And I mean, this war is gonna get bad and it's gonna get bloody and there's gonna be losses on both sides. My goodness. Now, I'm going to backtrack a little bit on my Batman comments from earlier. I mean, look, we know Batman fights for the innocent of Gotham. So Batman might be chilling at the Batcave talking to Alfred while all this is happening, letting the bad guys take themselves out. I remember the line from Batman Begins, right? When Bruce told Ra's al Ghul that,
I'll kill you, but I don't have to see you.
I love that we continue to get these little Easter eggs and references to the Batman, as we see this Easter egg with the question mark on the ex-mayor's billboard. Now, catching back up to Oz, with the drug now in his possession, we see that Oz forgot what the chemist told him, and that's how sensitive the product was, as they arrive to the location and they see that they only have 2 buckets worth left of the bliss that survived during this shootout. Now, to make matters worse, we see Oz gets the direct call from Sal Maroney, who survived the attack, and listen, we have to suspend our disbelief for a second, because Saul managed to escape Blackgate, as he tells Oz,
"No place I can't find you now. No place, Oz. You are cooked."
Cooked, huh? That's funny. Do me a favor, Sal. Call your wife. See if she answers.
I'm not gonna lie, that whole "you're cooked" line was wild from Oz to tell Sal after losing his wife and his son. Again, I don't want to look over the fact that he was able to escape Blackgate. That is, I know he's a big crime boss and he probably has some connections in the prison system, but I mean, they were on like their own island, so he had to get a boat and escape, and he's bleeding. So again, I just have to suspend my disbelief. Now, with Oz now having all this heat on him, he calls Vic and he tells him to move his mom to a safe place that Vic promises he'll find, and again, he promises to take care of his mother. Now, back with Sophia, who's in her parents' closet, she gets a visit from Julian. As he tells her,
"The release, I'd like to feel that too, with you, to be a part of whatever's next."
Now, I'm going to be honest with you all, I love this show so much. I think the characters are so well written and I love the performances, but to me, Julian is probably the worst written character in the show, and right now, seeing his simp ways are pretty bad. But look, Sophia has his hooks in him, and speaking of hooks, see her now wearing her mother's fur jacket, and for the first time this season, and probably in her entire life with Johnny, we see Johnny having everyone shut up and not ignore Sophia like he did in the past, but this time around, he wants everyone to pay attention to what she has to say. Now, Sophia addresses the elephant in the room by telling everyone the truth that she was the one that killed her family, and she's glad that they're gone. She brings up how her mom was done and how she was done the same way by her family, just kind of thrown away like trash, and that none of these men currently are made men except for Johnny, as she kisses his head. Almost kind of like a kiss of death. Now, she proceeds to tell her story, and she calls them pawns and expendable, and she brings up that her mother was a force and she couldn't be handled, and that her father's legacy is now dead. And this new empire will be under her mother's maiden name, which is the Gigantes, and now after claiming this new identity, we see Johnny believe she's stepping out of line, and like I said, that kiss of death comes back into play as he's trying to control the room again, which leads to Sophia shooting him in the head. Well, I guess the Johnny forgiveness tour didn't last that long. Damn, I knew that Johnny was going to eventually die, either by the hands of Oz or Sophia, but it makes sense that Sophia would do it, but I just didn't expect it to be so soon. Now, when you take into account Johnny's death, and you look at the death of Taj and Nadia in this episode, and of course Al, it just goes to show that no one's safe in this show. Which, by the way, I'm more than confident in saying that I believe Sophia always had a plan to kill Johnny, like in this meeting, very similar to how Oz wanted to kill Taj and his mom. It was all a part of her plan to show her new crew that the past is no more and that things will now be different. And again, that whole kiss of death comes into fruition because if you watch a lot of mob movies or TV shows like I do, especially like Goodfellas, one of the greatest of all time, whenever someone in the mob gives someone a kiss in like a meeting situation, it's pretty much a done deal for them. Now, finishing up what Sophia had to say in her speech before she shoots me, she takes the untraceable cash and tells them,
"If you join me, you will have a new family. I will pay you what you're worth."
More money than you've ever seen before.
The men now call her by her mom's maiden name and they take the cash, but the question is, do they actually respect her? Either way, I'm no simp, but I'm just gonna tell y'all right now, I'm a big House of the Dragon fan and I'm always team black. And Rhaenyra could never do no wrong in my eyes, and I feel the same way about Sophia, as I'm gonna change Team Sophia into now Team Gigante. Now, back with Vic, we see him taking Mrs. Cobb to Crown Point as they avoid his old friend Squid, who we will remember Vic's dad wasn't a fan of, as we can see that Squid has his little gang and we see them looting. Now, Vic takes her to his friend Calvin's house where we see Squid sees them entering the building. We see this place reminds Mrs. Cobb of where she raised her boys, and I don't want to skip over the fact that Squid seeing them enter the building probably sets up this confrontation between him and Vic somewhere down the line. And I wouldn't be surprised if we get a storyline involving Squid getting involved with Vic and Francis, and maybe he hurts her, or maybe even worse, maybe he kills her, or maybe he takes her, kidnaps her, and blackmails Oz for some cash in order to get his mom back. Either way, I think Vic and Squid and Mrs. Francis will have a plot moving forward. Now, back with Oz, he goes back to Eve's house, but this time around, they're no longer going to be Blondie and Clyde because she's not going to leave with him, she's not going to go to the safe house, and she tells him that she only will hold him back. Now, clearly Oz is upset. He has a little bit of a temper tantrum as he's throwing things around her house, and we're left to believe that she's going to be standing on business. She's going to stay there, and this is an incredibly stupid idea by her because we know Sophia will turn every rock and stone to find her, and when she inevitably does, she's going to either kill her or at the very least, she's gonna kidnap her and use her against Oz. Checking back in with Saul, we see him at his hideout spot where Sophia finds him. Now, Sophia admires the fact that the Maronis had this undying loyalty to their family and believes that they did the right thing in looking after one another no matter what. As she tells him about the story between her and Oz and how he betrayed her, which led her to going to Arkham. As she asks him if he would have approved of what her father did, which is sending her to Arkham and giving Oz a promotion, which he says he wouldn't have done. Matter of fact, he would have just killed Oz right then and there. As Sophia wants to end this war and wants to have an alliance between the Maronis and the Gigantes, as this will show a sign of strength between the two families, as their first plan is to kill Oz and to take over Gotham together. Something I think Oz would never have imagined. Yet again proving that he's underestimating Sophia. We wrap up this episode seeing Oz going to Calvin's place to find Vic in his mom's sleep, as he wakes up his mom to apologize about their current situation. Now Oz tries to put a spin on the situation by saying that he's happy that him and his mom are now under one roof together, but again she brings up that she lost her boys and losing them and bringing her here only reminds her of that, as his mother's son moment is over as she makes him leave the room. Now Vic wakes to a grateful Oz who acknowledges Vic for the decision to lay low in Crown Point. As Oz does talk about that Calvin's place does remind him of the place they grew up when he was kids, as this leads to Vic asking him to what actually happened to his brothers, as he tells him,
City took him. Just like it took your family.
Now, to me, this kind of sounds like either there was like a child protective services situation going on, or maybe they died in the streets getting caught up with Oz getting in trouble. Pretty confident that we'll eventually get the full backstory of what happened to his brothers, but the question I have for you all, do you think that Oz might have had something to do to whatever happened to his brothers? I mean, hell, we know Oz has always been scheming, and I wouldn't be surprised if it started at a young age. Did he maybe get jealous of the relationships that his brothers had with his mom, so to get them out of the picture, he had them removed by, again, either child protective services, or again, maybe he had something to do with them potentially dying? As we wrap things up with Oz taking Vic to where the trolleys used to be and him and his brothers used to hang out at, as we find out that these tunnels lead to everywhere across Gotham, a perfect place to run a business underground, undetected, and very similar to Oz's lair from the comics. All we need is some penguins running around, as this is the literal underbelly of Gotham, as Oz has a vision to grow his empire here and to grow to bliss, as he says this place is calling him home, hence the title of this episode, Homecoming.
Look, everything you heard about me, true. Stole Sophia's product. I popped Alberto Falcone. Did it all. I hustled. Do what it takes. At the end of the day, just a poor kid from the east side who's got something to prove, like all you.
Welcome back, everybody. This is my breakdown of the Penguin episode 6 titled Gold Summit. Now, to me, this episode was a little bit slower paced than others, and it didn't have that big moment like the others did, but this was all about our characters Oz, Vic, and Sophia making big decisions and making moves to either regain or gain control and power. All big things to setting up the last 2 episodes of the season. Let's get into this breakdown, full spoilers ahead. As we open the episode with Oz saying who's got the power of Gotham, as we get this montage basically showing us that some time has passed since the last episode. We see that Oz's underground empire seems to be thriving as they managed to work with those 2 buckets of bliss and they grew more out of those. Now Oz is using various methods and he's using different crews and gangs coming in and collecting the bliss and pushing the bliss and making some really good money out of it. Now in return, Oz feels like he's gained their respect and he's feeling like he's their provider and feeling like his mentor Rex Calabrese from his neighborhood when he grew up as a kid. Now the new partnership between the Maronis and the Gigantes haven't managed to find Oz's operation, so things are going well. Now to address the obvious time jump here, now this wasn't obviously months or years ahead of time, but there was enough time that has passed where the operation is fully operational, which brings me to this question, are you all okay with this? Meaning that we missed out on some potential character development or not seeing Oz getting these people involved. Now I would say that maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 weeks tops have passed since the last episode, and we also know that putting us in a timeline from the Batman and when the show starts off, and we also can see that there's snow on the ground. So again, 3 weeks, maybe 4 tops have passed. Now me personally, I'm not the biggest fan of time jumps and getting like off-screen development, but I have enough like faith in the writers that if they didn't show us what happened off screen that it wasn't essential to the story. But again, I pose the question to you all, do you feel cheated? Does it feel like too much of a stretch of all this has happened in that time period as far as the operation going on, but also the fact that they haven't been caught yet since last episode? Let me know your thoughts about the time jump in the comments below. We cut to Sophia and Julian, who are now engaging in some, how do I say, physical therapy this time around, with Sophia apparently being the one in charge, leaving the doc with cuts and bruises after their sessions. And we see that Julian is clearly head over heels for Sophia, but at this point in the season, I don't really know what the purpose of the character is, or at least to this point in the story, besides him being once Sophia's therapist, now being her boy toy. So I do hope that there is some type of payoff or some type of understanding of why Julian is essential to the story. Again, early in the season, I theorized that he might be Scarecrow in this show or might be Hugo Strange, but again, I don't think that's where they're going. Now in the kitchen, we see Salvatore is making a meal, and we see that this new partnership between them is still intact. You all will have to imagine that Carmine is turning over in his grave right now after seeing that Salvatore is in his house and in his kitchen with his daughter. Now they discuss how the search of Oz is becoming more and more difficult, as whenever they come close to one of his people, they seem to just vanish in thin air. Now as they share a meal together, we learn that his wife taught him how to cook in hopes that he can pass this down to a next generation, as he prepares this bowl for Sophia in the same way that he would for his own son. Now we see him actually have a bit of emotional reaction when Sophia compliments his meal, saying that his son was right about adding the yogurt, as they discuss how they're going to get Oz, as she says to him,
He needs the triads to make waves, and they made a deal with me, not us.
Sophia, people buy from whoever's selling. Oz got that tip from Carmine.
And I think that we just have to make it very clear that playing with Oz comes at a cost.
Now this scene could be looked at as nothing too big, but to me this does speak to this new relationship and almost kind of like this pseudo father and son, like this is the father she never had and maybe this is the daughter that he never had. But it also speaks to what Oz did to Salvatore Maroni and how he feels about him taking away his family. So again, this was a quick scene, but I did think it was important to their development to see where they've come from, again with that time jump happening. Now back with Oz, we see the living conditions haven't improved as the power keeps going in and out, but we also see that Frances' health continues to get worse. Now Vic tries helping her as she's going through one of her moments of being confused by mentioning her son Jack and trying to calm her down, but we see that this is something that Oz hates because he thinks that it's only making things worse for her. Meanwhile, we see Oz and Vic get Sophia's message about working with them comes at a cost, as some of the men that Vic recently hired have been killed and left out for the public to see, but also see that their pinkies are missing, which obviously is a message from her in regards to her brother being found that same way with his pinky missing. Now Oz knows that this message is potentially ruining a deal that he can set up with the triads, but we see Oz comes up with his own situation as he is now going to be giving out the product for free and creating this supply and demand. Now one of the side plots of this week's episode shows Vic dealing with Squid as he runs into him, and we see that he's pressing Vic about cutting him in on getting money and basically forcing himself into Vic saying yes. Now personally, I'm a bit confused by Vic's reaction to him because I felt that Vic and Oz has like a big enough crew for him to make just a simple call to have Squid either killed or at the very least have someone take him out to know not to mess with Vic, especially when we see Squid talking about Oz's mom in this scene. Again, I was just under the impression that the scared, timid version of Vic or not having people threaten him was kind of behind him, but we do see that changes later in this episode. Now back with Sophia and Salvatore, I was shocked to see them now just breaking into Oz's place. I would have thought that this would have been the first place they would have looked after what happened to his family. And by the way, kind of on that same note, are the police not even looking for him at this point after escaping Blackgate? Like, these are just the little things that I think about while watching this show, but they're there to obviously look for clues to where they can find Oz. Now, remembering that Oz told Sophia that his mom is dead and she already knew about his brothers, so they believe that Oz has no one close to him to make him pay for what he's done to them. As Salvatore lets his anger out by destroying Oz's belongings, we see Sophia continues to look around as she finds underwear and ultimately finds a picture of Eve. Now, speaking of people close to Oz, we get this emotional moment as we see that his mom was left in a cold bathtub for most of the night as she pours out her emotions about her current condition and she wants Oz to do the impossible. She tells her son that if she ultimately loses her mind before her body, she wants Oz to help her die. Now, initially, Oz refuses this, but his mom convinces him to do so when the time comes around. As we see that he dresses her up and he tells her,
You look gorgeous, Ma.
Like guilt?
I mentioned this in past breakdowns, but either he does what she just asked him to do, or Sophia gets to her first, which we see later in this episode, but there's no doubt in my mind that Francis will not be making it out of this season alive. Now, admittedly, I will admit that when we have these scenes with Francis, it doesn't necessarily push the narrative forward, but it is essential to Oz's character. As I've said in the past, and he said in last week's episode, his mom is the only thing that keeps him grounded, so even though there isn't much payoff with her so far, I do think that she will end up dying, and that being the essential point that Oz goes from Oz to accepting his name as the Penguin. Now, going back to the situation with Vic and Squid, we see Vic starts to tell Oz about his problems with him, but Oz has a lot more on his mind with everything going on with his mom, especially after what she just told him. So Vic obviously can read the room, and he doesn't want to bother him with this situation as Vic changes his mind about bringing up Squid, and this is to me the moment that Vic decided that he knew he had to take care of this on his own. Now, speaking of taking care of business, we see that Oz does that, and he follows up with the guy that he found dirt on in Carmine's safe back in episode 1. I love this little detail here as we see Oz using the literal tool he used on the generator to get the power back working, as he uses that tool to get the power back by using it with the guy's nose and forcing him to do his job and paying attention to Crown Point and the people of Crown Point. So again, it's a literal metaphor of Oz getting power. Using this as a parallel storyline to Oz taking back control and literal power to the apartment for his mom, we see Vic taking control of his situation with Squid as he has him meet him in the back alley to give him the news about the situation of him joining and how to get money with him and Oz. Now again, Vic is torn between the lifestyle that he lives and still being a good person as he does his good guy routine. He tries to give Squid some money and he says that he'll give him money for the next few weeks until things changes. Squid throws the money back in his face and he knows all about Oz's operations and he's willing to turn Oz in to the people that's looking for him. So again, Vic taking charge and taking control and taking power and handling this situation, we see him having no other options, or at least in his eyes, as he pretends to take him to Oz but ends up shooting Squid in the neck and ultimately killing him. Now, we can clearly see that Vic didn't want to do this, which to me showed me that he wasn't fully into this lifestyle and that killing isn't something that he's used to doing or that he wants to do, which ultimately still means to me that Vic still has a little bit of good inside of him. But then I think about, technically he's gotten rid of a body, he's been selling drugs, and I'm pretty sure he killed the guy that he hit Oz's car with, but I would assume his reaction to killing Squid was because obviously it was in close quarters, this was something personal to him because he actually knew this guy, so it can explain why he was so impacted by this. But let me know how you all felt about seeing his reaction to killing Squid, and do you think there's any good left in Victor, or is he just fully gone into this lifestyle? Now, after finding that picture, we see Sophia on the hunt for Eve as she comes across Roxy, who's willing to help her for the right price. Now, Sophia with a gun in her hand at Eve's door, she learns that Eve was the one who actually told Roxy to give her up in order to end this without getting one of her girls hurt. Now, they both have a conversation and exchange some words about Oz as Sophia tries to find her way into using her against Oz. Now, we see Eve speaks her truth about how she feels about Sophia and how she feels about her being titled as the hangman and thinking that she was the one that killed her friends, but Sophia ultimately tells her the truth. Now, it seems that Sophia and Eve have come to some type of understanding about Eve knowing about Al and protecting her girls, Sophia telling her the truth about Oz. All their chips are on the table now, and it appears that Eve knows that she's going to die in this moment. Now, Eve is accepting what's going to happen to her, and she tells her to keep her girls out of the situation, which to me was very key because this is Sophia seeing someone showing loyalty, something that she didn't even get from her own father. As we see Eve looks at Sophia right in the eyes as she says this, she's staring death in the eyes, as this to me gains Sophia respect and she doesn't kill her. Now, in return of sparing her life and also learning that Oz lied to her about Sophia being the hangman or not telling Eve about the truth, Eve ultimately screws him over and gives Sophia his location. Now, a couple things about this scene. If something bad happens to his mom or to Vic, I would imagine that Oz will probably go back to Eve and know that she was the only one that knew of their location and he might end up killing her. Now, the next thing I want to point out is this to me was the best scene of this episode in my opinion. Like, it was great acting. I loved how they were speaking back and forth and getting their perspectives out there and the way that the story was told. Both of these characters getting something out of one another, but also one getting respect, the other one getting the truth, two things that doesn't come easy in Gotham. Again, the thing I loved about this scene is these two women have their questionable ways about them, or at least that's how they're looked at, and they realize they have something in common, more than they could have imagined. And they, again, one of the things that was so key about this was they got the respect from one another, but also haven't found out that they were both lied to by Oz. Now, to follow up one excellent scene with another, we have this scene here where Vic comes to Oz to tell him what happened between him and Squid, as Oz tells Vic,
Don't look down. Meet me here. Done the right thing. Protected those you care about. You're strong, kid.
"It only gets easier" line to me was crazy, because that just says so much about how Oz looks at his reasoning for killing. It's always been said that the best villains think that their actions are right because they think that they're right. They're the heroes of their story, and Oz believes that it gets easier. Killing people is justified because he believes he's doing that to protect the people he loves, and this is planted into Vic's head. Love this moment between them because, again, it sets Vic on this path of if he kills now, he can now remove himself from the situation or have no remorse from his actions, because if he does that, he's doing it for the people he cares for, which at this point in the season, the only person he has is Oz. And I would also throw into the fact that he also has a relationship with Francis, and they've developed this caring relationship with each other. So I really did love these back-to-back scenes, and these being the best scenes of this episode for me personally. Now we wrap up this episode with seeing Oz gathering up some of the big pushers and some of the more low-level heads of Gotham as he calls his meeting the Gold Summit. Oz points out their disposition and how they've been used and how they've been looked down upon for those like Sophia or Salvatore, and how all their hard work through their family's generations have been stolen by the rich. Now we see Zao speaking his mind and reminds everyone about the Penguin being a liar and that he's willing to do anything to end up on top. Now Oz responds by saying that he has a new code that he'll be playing by if they all agree to work together and work with the people they hate the most. As we see Oz pulling his ego and his bravado aside, and he tells them that yeah, he killed Al and he also took Sophia's product, and he did all this as a hustle to survive because of where he comes from and how he was raised, as he reminds them that they probably come from a similar environment. Now it seems this moment of honesty from Oz seemed to work, as each of them open up their beers as a sign of them all agreeing to work together and taking back Gotham. Meanwhile, back at Crown Point, the power's back on, which wakes up Frances as she wants to have a dancing moment with Vic. Now again, with Vic happy, Frances happy, they're dancing, having a good time, the heat's back on working. We see the camera pull out and we see Sophia is here with a crowbar in her hand watching their happiness. As we see Frances yelling out in happiness that her boy did this, and obviously Sophia watching this, she knows that Oz lied about his mom being dead. Now the question is, what will Sophia do with them?
These men, they're dead because you did the right thing. You protected your home, your investment. I'm proud of you. I'm grateful to you. But this ain't over. There's a storm coming. I'm gonna need your help.
Welcome back, everybody. This is my breakdown of The Penguin, episode 7, titled Top Hat. Now, as far as this episode goes, this episode had two things that felt like a little bit of plot armor that we'll be discussing in this breakdown. But other than that, this was a literal explosive episode filled with needed backstory to what happened to Oz's brothers, and we got to see what makes these characters break. Speaking of break, let's get into this breakdown, spoilers ahead. We open this penultimate episode with a flashback to when Oz was a kid. We see that his foot was even in a brace at a young age as he sets a date for a movie night with his mom. Now we get to meet his other brothers, Benny and Jack, and I said this a few breakdowns ago that what if Oz was jealous of his brothers and had something to do with whatever happened to them? Pretty confident that we'll eventually get the full backstory of what happened to his brothers, but the question I have for you all, do you think that Oz might have had something to do to whatever happened to his brothers? I mean, hell, we know Oz has always been scheming, and I wouldn't be surprised if it started at a young age. Did he maybe get jealous of the relationships that his brothers had with his mom, so to get them out of the picture, he had them removed by, again, either Child Protective Services, or again, maybe he had something to do with them potentially dying. And we see the jealousy of the attention that his mom was giving them in this very scene. Now we see that Frances sends her boys outside while she finishes up some paperwork for Rex Calabrese. Now Frances gives Jack some information to give to Rex Calabrese, and you can clearly see that Jack isn't a fan of Rex, or at the very least, he doesn't like the idea that his mother works for him. Now after Jack gives Rex what his mother told him to give, we see that Rex gives him $50, and we see that Jack tells his little brothers that Rex doesn't pay his mother enough for working for him, as we watch them head down to the underground tunnels to play a game of hide and seek before the storm hits. Now we know that the game was to help pass the time as the storm passes by, as we see Oz looks around for his brothers and he eventually finds them in this area that goes down by a ladder near a sewer-like area. Now Oz gets upset because it's hard for him to go down a ladder, and he shuts the door on them and leaves them and heads back home, not knowing what he actually did to his brothers. Now back at home, we see Oz and his mom have their movie date night as the rain continues to pour down. Now Francis takes Oz's word about his brothers going to the movies, as we cut to seeing them begging and pleading for help as the water has risen where they're trapped inside, as we slowly see their screams for help eventually stop, and now we know what actually happened to Oz's brothers. This 10-minute flashback sequence gave us so much backstory in such a small amount of time. We got to see the family dynamic, we got to see little jealous Oz and how he was scheming at a young age. We also officially met Rex Calabrese and even saw how Oz has been wanting to get his ma into a penthouse since he was a kid. What a great opening to this fantastic episode. Also, I gotta give props to the casting department. They did a great job of casting the young Oz and also Francis. Those were just spot on casting roles. Now let's have this conversation in the comments. Now look, personally, I don't think that he meant to kill them. I don't think he knew that they were going to drown in the water, but there was clearly a feeling of him wanting his mom for himself, and maybe somewhere down the line, this was bound to happen where Oz would have eventually found a way to get them out of the picture. Either way, what a tragic story, and Oz kept this secret for all these years, saying that the city got them and literally meant it. So share your thoughts about this opening. Do you all think that Oz purposely knew what he was doing by shutting that door? But also just share your overall thoughts about the reveal in the comments below. Flash forward, we see Oz is happy to seeing the lights back on, but he immediately heads upstairs to see the damage that was left inside. We see Vic is knocked out, but eventually wakes up to tell Oz what he remembers. Now Oz sees Sal is outside and has Vic leave and tells him to reach out to his new business partners in crime about what just happened and tasks Vic to building him an army, as it appears that Oz is prepared to face what's coming to him head on and he's accepting defeat. Now I talked about earlier there were two things that bothered me with this episode regarding plot armor, and this is one of them. I personally was extremely surprised that Sophia kept Vic alive, because all she knows, Vic could have had something to do with her brother's death, and we know that he did, so I was shocked that she kept him alive. Like, what would be the reason of keeping Vic alive? She didn't have him give Oz a message or anything of that nature, so again, I'm just shocked about that. But honestly, a part of me knows that it's a script, a story cheat code, or like I said, a plot armor to keep Vic alive for now. Again, it could just be me, but let me know if you all felt that it was plot armor that Vic had, and again, did you feel surprised that Sophia kept him alive? Now we see that Sal brings the club that he got from Oz's house and he starts to beat him with it, and this is kind of like a small dose of payback for what Oz did to his wife and son. But we see that Sal isn't here to kill him. He agreed with Sophia to keep him alive for now, as he tells Oz,
That's just a little taste of what you got coming. We got your mother. Yeah, we got your family.
Now during all this, we cut to Sophia, who gets the call that they got Oz, and you could just see that smile of happiness on her face as she knows that she's finally got the man who's caused her all this pain and suffering over the past 10 years. Now, Oz is told to show them where he holds his operations, but he wants to see his mom first, but we see that Sal reminds him that he's in no position to making any deals. Now again, we head back to Sophia, who still has that smile on her face as she's serving Francis breakfast. Now as she's serving her, we get served with two of the most important women in Oz's life sharing their first scene together in this series. Sophia tells her that she was led to believe that she was dead, as we see Francis holds her own and wants to get whatever Sophia wants from her. Now she tells Sophia that Oz is not gonna roll over and he will kill Sal like he did to his family, and he will come for her next, and she is just a confident woman in this scene. We even see Francis taking shots at Sophia's recent name change and the new look and personality she's took on, as Sophia is getting a kick out of the lack of fear out of Oz's mom. Now Sophia wants to get some insight from the woman who shaped Oz, and we see Francis shares how Oz felt about working for Sophia and her family for all those years, as she tells her,
Okay, you want to know about my boy, Oswald? Always 2 steps ahead. All those years, driving you around, cleaning up after you and your family. He was watching, studying. He knows this game better than you. Same winners, same losers. My Oswald puts a bullet in that pretty little skull of yours. I'll be tap dancing on your grave.
After taking all the insults and back and forth from Sophia and Francis, we see Sophia brings up her other boys and wonders if they're really dead or if Oz has them kept up somewhere like he had her, as this is the breaking point for Francis. This breaks her hard shell. Sophia gets to her as we see her hand begins to shake. Again, Sophia gets to Francis. She gets under her skin because we see that she mentally breaks her as she goes back to all those years of the night where she lost her boys. Now, Sophia thinks that this is a good opportunity to maybe get a little bit closer to Francis, but she learns quickly as she gets slapped by her, and Sophia knows that she's onto something and can maybe not just physically get revenge on Oz, but it clearly appears that she wants to break him mentally as well. Like Bane said to Batman in The Dark Knight Rises,
"Ah, yes, I was wondering what would break first, your spirit or your body."
Now we cut to Cuckboy Julian telling Sophia about her cousin Gia and how he's learned that a doctor has been asking Gia about what happened the night of the Falcone's deaths. Now Sophia, cool, calm, collective, tells him that she'll take care of this, but she wants him to talk to Francis in the meantime to ask some questions about most likely about Oz, and again, finding a way to break him mentally. Now back with Oz and Sal, we see that he takes them to his underground operations as Sal announces the new changes to the management. Now Oz, being Oz, tries to get into Sal's head as he tells him that he's working with Sophia now, even after what her family has taken away from him all those years ago. But we see that he remains loyal, and he tells Oz the only thing keeping him alive right now is the fact that they haven't come up with an idea how to kill him yet. But again, Oz, being Oz, takes the mind games to another level as he brings up how it smelt when killing his wife Nadia and Tariq, and again, just like Francis hearing about her boys, this was his breaking point as he wants to set Oz on fire, which causes a distraction as one of Oz's guys cuts the power off, creating chaos. Now as Oz and Sal go toe to toe, we see that Sal gets the upper hand in this fight, but unfortunately he begins to grab his chest and it appears that he's having a heart attack and he dies right then and there as Oz gives him a piece of his mind about beating him as he shoots him several times, literally shooting the man while he's down and he's dead, as Oz says that he wins. Look, this is my second issue with this fantastic episode, as I am convinced that Oz is a metahuman in this DC Matt Reeves universe, as his superpower is clearly having the world's best luck. I can't lie, I love this show, I love this episode, don't get me wrong. But the ways Oz gets out of things sometimes comes off a bit unrealistic, or similar to earlier this episode with Vic, the plot armor is very thick on his character. Again, I get that unexpected things like this can happen, but him dying of a heart attack? But Sal managing to get stabbed in the gut and survive, and managing to escape a prison and not getting caught? The only reason I bring these two things up is because this show is so airtight with amazing script, and everything is so grounded in its universe and its approach. So when things like Vic surviving for no reason, or Oz making it out of this fight after we see this heart attack happen to Sal, when these moments happen, it just stands out to me like a sore thumb. And again, it's just showing the plot armor for these characters, where I just think there could have been a better way to execute those moments for those characters. Now back to Oz winning, we see he gathers the men who survived the shootout and gives them a speech as he tells them,
"There's a storm coming. I'm gonna need your help."
Now we go back to Sophia, who's paying a visit to Gia as she walks in the hallways and reminds her of all the years that she spent in Arkham. Now Gia tells her that she saw a mask in Sophia's bag the night of her parents' death, and she actually asks her if she killed her parents. Now we watch as Sophia does what I would imagine her father Carmine Falcone did when explaining what happened to her mother when she was Gia's age. Now we see that Sophia manages to manipulate her as we see Gia agrees with her about what happened that terrible night was an accident, as Sophia sees that she's been harming herself by cutting her own arm. Now even though Sophia is locked in and she's taken on this new personality, she still sees the parallels between what happened with Gia and what happened to her, as she tells her,
It might sound confusing, and I know that it hurts. Your mom and your dad, everyone in our family, they were bad people, deserved it. And I am glad that they're gone.
Now, secretly, I know this would never happen in a million years, but I personally would love it if Matt Reeves ages up Gia and makes her like a Batgirl character, right? I know obviously it'll be a whole new backstory or make her a new Robin, but seriously, Gia would be a perfect candidate to join the Bat family. Now, as Sophia leaves, we see this conversation has clearly shaken her, and I love this episode showing all these tough interior type of characters having these vulnerable moments. Like, again, Frances and her boys, or hearing about her boys, or Oz and his mom being taken, or Sal and his family's death. All these people putting on fronts, putting on their masks, but deep down inside, they all have a similar pain, and that's losing the people closest to them. Now, we see Sophia getting the call from Oz as he tells her,
You want to kill me? I get it. But there is one thing you want more. Ever since I known you, you had your eye on the throne. That's your chance. All you gotta do is bring it to me. Just bring it to me.
So the question is, will she take the bait? Back with Francis, we see Julian using the same machine that he would use on Sophia, but the session is cut short as we see Sophia pulls him aside to talk. She tells him that Sal has died and tells him about her agreeing with Oz and meeting with her and dropping his mother off so she can take the throne. She continues to say that she knows it's a trap, but she doesn't care because she knows she's doing this pattern or this generational curse of repeating the same thing over and over again of all these crimes and drugs and all the dead bodies her father left behind as she's becoming him. We see Sophia begins having a panic attack as Julian pulls her back and asks her what she really wants as she tells him,
I want Oz to feel pain, real pain, the kind that I have felt. I need him to suffer what he's done.
Now back with Oz, who has his army ready, but he still hasn't heard back from Vic, as he learns that it appears that Sophia is headed his way. Now we see this black car slowly creeping up to him as he gets a call from Sophia. As Sophia mentions that his ma helped her figure out who she wants to be, as we see the car getting closer to Oz, we see this guy get out of the car, runs out of the car. Oz looks in the back seat and he finds what he thinks is the only person he's ever truly loved and cared for, but it's a part of Sophia's new game. She's the Jigsaw of this world now, as his mother is still alive, but she left him with a ticking time bomb. She tells him that if he survives, to come find her. And ladies and gentlemen, this is what I call a wonderful story callback as Oz runs and jumps in what I assume is the same place with the door that he locked his brothers into as the bomb explodes, killing what I assume is most of the men on that area there and causing a ripple effect on the surface. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Batman, if you don't get your ass out of your cave and figure this out, I don't know what else to say. Now we end this explosive episode by going back to Oz's flashback where we cut to the story of Oz when he told Sophia at her brother's funeral about the state of his mom was in after losing her boys, and the night that she took him to listen to jazz, as it's the same place that Sophia took her when she was on the phone with Oz. We see Francis telling Oz to make her a promise to making sure that he gives her all the dreams that she wants, that they come true, and giving her the penthouse and everything that comes with that dream, or else she doesn't know how she's gonna be able to live with herself after losing her boys. This being Oz's motivation as he promises he'll give her the life that she deserves and he won't quit until he does. This explains so much. This explains everything about Oz, why he's done what he's done before the show and all the events that we've seen in this show to keep the promise to his loving mother. Again, what makes a great villain is them seeing or justifying their actions being rooted in good faith in their reality, and Oz sees the lying, the cheating, the killing as a way of getting his ma the life that she deserves. Look, it's effed up, right? But he is the true definition of a mama's boy. Now, the last shot shows Oz in the debris as he climbs up the same steps that he couldn't get down when he was a kid, as he sees the destruction on the ground level and runs into the drop head detective that we met a few weeks ago, as he's here on the behalf of Sophia and he knocks out Oz to take him to her.
Oz, it's your strength. Oz, it drives you. It don't make you weak. You're a good man, Vic. You got a good heart.
Welcome back, everybody. This is my breakdown of the Penguin finale, episode 8, titled A Great or Little Thing. Now, before we get into the breakdown, I want to let you all know that on the night of the finale, I'm going to be hosting 2 live streams. So one was a watch party, so I watched the episode live with you all. And the second one will be an after show talking about everything that this finale had to offer. So again, if you're watching this episode right now, finish watching this video, then come and join it live. But of course, if you're watching the replay, you can click the link to both of those live streams in the description of this very video. With all that being said, we have made it to the end of one hell of a series. But the question is, did it stick the landing? How did it set up the Batman Part 2? Who lived? Who died? What was the best part of this finale? Let's get into it. Let's break it all down. Full spoilers ahead. We open this finale with Julian using his machine that he's used before as he's speaking to Frances about taking herself back to the time she lost Benny and Jack, and we see that she gets a visit from Rex. Now we see that Rex actually cares for Frances. He's trying to comfort her in this scene. He wants her to get out of the house after what just happened, and he even offered to pay for the funeral. Now it appears that Oz was the one that kind of encouraged Rex to check in on his ma, as we finally hear how Frances feels about Oz being so damn needy. Now this next part here, I did not anticipate finding out like this, because we find out that Frances knew about what Oz did to his brothers and that he didn't tell her. She says that she's been living with the devil and doesn't know what to do. Rex gives her some advice and tells her that he's seen people like Oz before and they can serve a purpose if controlled. He continues by suggesting that she use Oz's obsession over her to her advantage and maybe he'll grow up to be great one day. Now initially Frances couldn't imagine ignoring what she knows about Oz now, and she says to herself, like, what kind of mother would this make her? As that comment leads to Rex saying, well, maybe she should let him go, aka get rid of him permanently and killing her remaining son Oz, and we can clearly see that this is the option she wants to take. Now cut to the night of the jazz club, but this time we get it from Frances' perspective after listening to Rex's idea to get rid of him. Now in the club, we see Frances telling Oz that Rex will be driving him home later because this is a part of the plan, how she's going to get rid of him. And we see little killer Oz looks his ma in the eyes and he tells her that he knows that she misses his brothers, her sons, and he misses them too. I mean, little Jeffrey Dahmer Oz is insane to look his mom in the face and continue to lie to her. Like the face right here on the screen now says it all. Now in the middle of this, we see that she notices Sophia looking at her in the club, and this almost kind of breaks the trance that Julian has her in, but we see that he calms her down and he gets her back to that moment. Now we watch as Oz tells his mom all these big ideas that he has. He's going to be the man of the house. He's going to be getting the job. He's got ideas to get money in his pocket and to make sure that he can provide for his mom. He goes on and tells her that he basically knows her better than anyone else, and all these nice things and all these promises he's saying, it seems to have an effect on Frances and is working on her, as he vows that he's going to prove her this and he's going to do what he's promising her as long as she doesn't give up on him. A question I have for you all in the comments now: was Frances not going through with the plan because she honestly didn't want to lose another son and she didn't want to be responsible for like the death of her son? Or was the idea of having all these nice things and these promises that Oz is making to her and Rex saying that she can use him and take advantage of his obsession over her? Which one was it? Was it not killing my son? Was it trying to get a better lifestyle? Was it a little bit of column A, column B? Let me know in the comments, why didn't Frances go through with this? Let's talk about it. Now looking back at this scene, even at that young age, Oz managed to talk himself out of getting taken out by his own mother, and he didn't even know it. He's got a way with words, man, and he knows how to talk himself out of anything. But yet again, another great way to open up this episode like they did last week. I'm just still shocked to learn that she actually knew of her son's involvement with his brother's deaths and never spoke of it to Oz after knowing what he did, but the silence will unfortunately be broken later in this episode. Now cut to present day. As I assumed last week, Vic got Oz his army by getting the gangs that Oz put together involved. Now they arrived to see the aftermath of what Sophia did, but none of them seem interested in finding Oz like Vic wants to, and they all start to leave until Vic speaks his mind. We watch as Vic calls them cowards for leaving and sounds like Oz in doing so. We see Vic stepping out of line until Link punches him in the stomach and seamlessly protects him from speaking out too much and catching a bullet as we watch them ultimately leave the scene. Now we'll be discussing this a little bit later, but Link seems to be a real one towards Vic, and I wonder if we'll ever see him again in something like the Batman 2, but I also wonder if he'll be upset if he ever finds out what actually happens to Vic later. Now we see Vic headed into the chaos to find Oz, but all he finds is the hole that was left left in the ground by Sophia, as Vic runs into one of the goons who was an electrician guy, and he learns that Oz is actually alive. Now, it's little moments like this, and we get this throughout the episode, where we see how concerned Vic was for Oz's well-being, because he learned to care for Oz, and as he calls him later, he's a part of his family, and seeing Vic care so much makes what happens to Vic at the end of this episode even more heartbreaking. Now, speaking of Oz, we see him tied up in front of Sophia as they bring Francis into the room as well. Now, first off, I gotta say it right now, Sophia was looking good, y'all, I'm not gonna lie, but we can also see that she was relishing in this moment as she shares a childhood story about these birds and using it as a metaphor for what Oz did to his brothers and how Francis did nothing in punishing him. Now, Sophia holds a family therapy session for the Cobb family and lets Oz be the first one to speak, and she wants to know and wants him to explain why he left his brothers to die in those tunnels. As Sophia continues to apply the pressure by questioning why did Francis let this little devil live, because he ended up causing so much pain to others, including Sophia herself. Now, after not expressing her feelings towards her son and also spitting in Sophia's face, we see that Sophia has Julian cut one of her hands free and is about to cut one of her fingers off like Oz did to Sophia's brother Al, unless Oz tells the truth. As we watch them both screaming in anguish, we see Francis yells out that she already knows what he did. Man, Oz is so messed up. He was willing to have his own mother lose her finger than tell the truth. What a insane human being he is. But Sophia even calls him out and says that he doesn't love her as much as he says he does, and he doesn't truly care about anyone except himself. Now, Francis walks up to Oz and tells him that he is a disappointment and he's a waste of space, and this is the worst part of it all if you ask me. She looks him in the face and tells him that she should have let Rex kill him when she had the chance, and then proceeds to grab a bottle and break it and stab her son in the stomach. Man, we end up seeing her calling him again the devil as we see Francis sees little Oz react, which was a really good moment. I love that cut to the younger version, like the innocence of Oz, right? As we see him, we also see Francis then sees Jack and Benny drenched in that sewer water, and then she watches them vanish, causing what we later find out was a stroke because the truth was finally revealed. Listen, man, there is so much to break down in this moment of Oz hearing his mom call him a disappointment and that she should have killed him, and also, of course, Francis essentially mentally dead in the scene by finally speaking the truth. But then looking at this from Oz's perspective, hearing his mom, the woman that he would do anything for and do anything to please her, to make her happy, but ultimately shaming him and basically disowning her own son, this to me is the moment he knew that he could never ever again have someone get so close to him, no matter who they are, including his own mother, and we'll later talk about what happens to Vic. This also was actually the last time he actually got to speak to his mom before she actually has the stroke. So this is a very big moment. But getting back into the actual scene here, we see Frances passes out, hits her head on the ground as Oz hulks out and manages to break out of the chair and goes full on John Wick style and kills two of Sophia's men in the process, as him and his mom ultimately get to escape. But again, going back to this outstanding scene, and I think it's my favorite scene in this incredible episode, by the way, but we have so much tension in this room. I mean, the reveals that we get, the performances that we have, it was just all amazing to me. And I just have to point this out, how much Oz truly ruined Sophia and also his mom Frances' life by the decisions that he made. Going back to what he did to Sophia, ratting her out to get the attention from Carmine, and then intentionally or unintentionally getting rid of his brothers in last week's episode, Oz has caused so much damage in both of their lives, and they don't even realize that they have that in common. Now, looking at it from Sophia's perspective, it's almost like she's using Oz and his mom to release in their secrets and reflecting on not getting the chance to talk to her own father about what he did to her and betraying her, and all while destroying Oz in the process. But speaking of Oz again, he just heard that his childhood hero Rex Calabrese was supposed to kill him under the approval of his own mother. I do wish that there was more of an acknowledgement of that particular moment, of that reveal, but I think that this goes to speak to what happens to Vic later. Again, you all can tell I cannot wait to talk about this scene with you all. But what happens to Vic later is probably a part of his reasoning why, again, not allowing anyone to get close to him again. Now we see Oz takes his mom to a hospital, and he ends up snagging one of the nurse's phones as he calls Vic to meet him at the hospital as he's stitching himself up. Now as Vic arrives, he finds Oz at what I would say is probably the lowest point that we've seen Oz in this show. Like, it's not losing to Bliss, it's not losing to the Batman film, it's not losing the fight to Sophia so far. far, but it's losing his ma. Like, we know she's alive, but we'll talk about it. Like, she's basically brain dead at this point, but losing his ma, like, completely broke him, and you can see that in Oz's face in this scene. But we see Vic pulls a page out of Oz's playbook and gives him a motivational speak and tells Oz,
Listen to me. You gave people jobs in Crown Point. You got the power back on. Nobody did that. Nobody else did that. Nobody even tried. You gave people dignity. Get the hell up. Let's go. Get your shit together and, be you.
As Oz and Vic head out to make their plan to attack Sophia, as Oz, still after what just happened with his mom, knows that he wants to be that kid again, essentially, and he wants to keep the promise that he made to her all those years ago. Look, man, Oz is still clearly in denial about what just happened with his mom. Like, he just thinks that, oh, she's disappointed to me because she was taken by Sophia, but not acknowledging, and he's ignoring the truth that was revealed and almost being killed by his own ma. So again, Oz is, he's a smart individual when it comes to street smarts, but when it comes to emotional availability, my man's pretty screwed up. Now back with Sophia, she invites the gangs over and she tells them,
Nothing left for me here. But my home, my territories, my businesses can all be yours.
Now, whoever finds Oz first gets everything that she has, or at least that she has left under the Falcone family. We see Link is the only one to speak up against her, and she says, no, I'm being honest, and she stands her decision, and she's gonna put this bounty on Oz's head. Now, back with Vic and Oz, we see they're headed to the courthouse, and we see Vic gets a call from Link, and he tells him about the bounty, and he asks where they are. Now, we know what happens, but in this moment, I'll be honest, I was thinking to myself, can Vic actually trust Link in this situation? Is he actually being honest with Vic? Or is he pretending to help out him and Oz to collect that bounty? The show did a really good job of playing to the latter. Now, we see that Oz ends up setting up the meeting with the Dirty Councilman, as Oz has it all planned out, and he has his eyes set on a much bigger fish as he tells him that Sophia was responsible for the explosion at Crown Point, and she did this to end the biggest drug operation in Gotham ran by Sal. Oz is selling him a headline and adds in that Sal was the one to kill Al, and Sophia was seeking revenge by killing his wife and kid, and she again was the one responsible, which we do know that is the truth. She was the one that started that explosion, giving the people something to hate and blame, and Sophia being that one, as Sebastian Haney gets all the credit in the process. Oz is selling him a career opportunity. In return, Oz wants to bump elbows with a higher up in the government, one being Bella Rell. Bastion warns him of what Bella's got planned for all the corruption going on in Gotham and tells Oz that he needs a new look, he needs to be clean, and we'll see that come to fruition a little bit later. Look, I jokingly said last week that Oz's superpower is that he's the luckiest man in Gotham, but in reality, it's his way that he can pitch the hell out of an idea. He just makes things seem easy as pie. Like, that is Oz's superpower. He can sell you on anything. Now, we actually get to see Mayor Bella Rell make an appearance in this episode, and I love the consistency from seeing her in the film. Obviously, we know she was injured in the flood, and we see that in the scene that she actually has her arm in a sling, and again, this was the results of what happened to Batman. Again, you gotta just love the consistency. I don't want to look over this because this is a very important scene that we just witnessed, because in my opinion, this plot will 100% be a big part of the Batman Part 2. Bella cleaning the streets up of Gotham while Oz makes his way into running with the politicians like Sebastian, who's corrupt, which leads me to think that another political figure will make a move against someone like Sebastian, and you all know who I'm thinking about. If not, I'll give you a hint. He has two faces. That's right, I'm talking about Harvey Dent. But that's just one of the breadcrumbs that was set up for the Batman Part 2. There's a couple others that I'm going to share with you all a little bit later in this breakdown. Now, Oz heads back to the car to see that Vic is missing and Link has arrived. Again, it looked like Vic made the wrong call, and I thought that this was setting up that Oz was going to see this move as betrayal from Vic, even though he was honestly just trying to help out Oz. Now, Sophia gets a call from Mr. Zhao, who tells her that they have Oz in her possession. You can see her getting happy again, but we see her taking out all her father's belongings. Again, thinking about what this episode did to Sophia, setting up her kind of moments of just letting everything go. I finally have Oz. I now have all my father's belongings. I can get rid of this past that's been haunting me my entire life, or at least to the point that she was locked in Arkham for 10 years, as she gathers up her father's belongings and sets everything, and I mean everything, on fire. She even burns the house that her father built, the Falcone legacy, right? She burns it all to the ground, metaphorically and literally, in this moment, and she's just got got one more thing to take care of before leaving Gotham, as she said earlier in the episode, and that's finally getting rid of Oz, or at least that was the plan. Now, Sophia arrives at the meetup spot, and just as things are looking good for Sophia, she's about to get rid of Oz, she has him dead to rights, she looks at him in the face, he looks back at her with a smile on his face, as it appears that Link was being honest as he shoots and kills Mr. Zhao, and we see the rest of Sophia's men get taken out as well, leaving Sophia alone. As Oz calls back to the old times, he takes her on a little drive. Now we find out in this car ride that Oz got Link on his side and the others on his side, as they were all tired of being overlooked, very similar to what Oz and how he felt, as we see all the number 2s taking out their bosses and they just want more power. As they arrive to the destination, and this is why I love Sophia so much, like she accepts her fate. Like she is just there. She knows she's about to die, or at least she thinks she's about to die. She even makes one more comment towards Oz, talking about, did your mom, how's she doing? Did she tell you she loved you? She's proud of you, like taking all these digs at him. Again, she's accepting, overlooking Oz, and she even says her mom didn't overlook him. She saw the devil in him. Again, I love Sophia so much. She looks at Oz in the face and tells him,
from the very beginning, you have always been a monster.
As she takes one last breath, again, she was ready to die in this moment, but lights appear and Oz is gone, and Chief Mackenzie arrives with the cavalry, something that Sophia never had in this episode. She only had like 1 or 2 men with her in all these setups, but we'll talk about that later, as they arrest her and take her back to hell, aka Arkham, her worst nightmare. I gotta be honest, man, that was something I wasn't expecting. I thought that Oz was gonna kill her, but again, this goes back to all the plans that he set up a little bit earlier with the councilman, but that was like a Batman move, if I'm being honest, by Oz. But the best part, and I mean the best thing about this moment for me, if you guys have been watching all my reviews, they didn't kill Sophia Gigante. Thank you, writers, for keeping such a good character alive. Again, she's a goddamn G. She didn't beg or plead or scream for mercy. She was ready to die. She was looking in the face of death. She was ready to face her consequences for not getting rid of Oz throughout this season. Again, I'm Team Gigante. Oz heads back to the hospital with Vic to celebrate his victory, as he puts the TV on to show his mom about Sophia, or as the TV says, they caught the hangman again, but Oz notices that Frances isn't saying a word and she's a shell of herself. As a nurse walks in and tells Oz that she suffered a stroke, leaving her in a vegetative state, as Oz just completely loses it. I gotta believe deep down that even past his denial and his psychotic ways, Oz knows he's responsible for the destruction of his mom's mental and physical state. Oz breaks down in tears and just wants to hear she's proud of him, and he wanted to keep the promise he made to her all those years ago, but of course she's not responsive, as we watch Vic puts his hand on his shoulder. We'll talk about his shoulder a little bit later as we watch Oz continues to cry. Man, Colin Farrell in this scene was incredible. Like him crying and begging to hear from his mom was just such a great moment. It's such a great performance. But I gotta know in the comments, man, and putting aside what happens next, let me know how you all feel about that scene. Like, did you all, there's no right or wrong answers, but did you all feel bad for Oz in this moment, and also obviously feel bad for Frances in this moment? Let me know your thoughts about that in the comments below. Now, the moment I have been dreading to talk about, as we see Vic and Oz have a drink about, again, their victories, but they say that it doesn't feel real after what just happened, losing so much, especially on Oz's side, as Oz, again, doesn't tell Vic exactly what he did with his mom, why his mom would be upset with him, and how she ended up in this position. As he brings up his brothers in this moment, we watch them both say their thank yous to one another for keeping themselves alive throughout the season, and Oz not giving up on Vic, and Oz tells Vic that he wouldn't have made it this far without him, and Vic calls Oz family and thanks him for not giving up on him. I want to put an emphasis on not giving up on him and look at the parallels of how Oz wanted his mom to not give up on him, which she ultimately did, and how that relates to Vic in this moment. Not quitting on him was just really well written. As Oz said, it's just them two left. Once he wrapped his hand around Vic's shoulder, and as soon as he said, "But look, hey kid," I just knew what was coming. Tells him that he can't take him with him this time around because family makes him weak and he can't have that no more. He puts his hand on Vic's throat and he takes him out like the hangman would. As he's doing this, he's saying all these nice things to Vic, like, you got a good heart, kid, you got a good man, and all this stuff, and he's strangling him, man. Like, he's strangling someone. Strangling someone to death is so personal, and it's so violent to me. I just want to punch the TV screen, if I'm being honest with you all. Like, R.I.P. to Vic, such a sad moment, as Oz kills his own brothers, and now he kills, like, essentially his little brother and Vic, as he watches him slowly die, and he says to Vic,
"It wasn't for nothing."
As Oz takes his money, he looks at his ID, like very similar to how he looked at Vic's ID in episode 1. He throws it in the water to leave him as a John Doe. No one's going to be able to identify him probably. As the ID goes into the depths of the water, and this is where my mind went, I almost think that this kind of represents his ID going down to the depths of the water is almost how like Vic lost his family in the water, and now he's in the water with them. So the question is, why did he kill Vic? Well, I figure that he killed him because, I mean, there's so many different reasons, but one of them being like he wanted his mother's attention so much, right? Like, think of where I'm going with this. He wanted his ma attention so much that he was willing to kill his own brothers, but now that his ma is like essentially kind of brain dead, he looks at Gotham very similar to like how he looked at his mom. Like, he wants to be the man of Gotham, right? He wants the attention of Gotham, being the kingpin of Gotham, and he doesn't want any more distractions from someone like family. But also, like we saw with the number 2s killing their bosses, I would imagine, again, in Oz's sick brain, he probably played it out in his head that Vic will probably do the same to him one day, and he just wants to take care of that right now. But backtracking and talking about the moment, man, like, what a heartbreaking, heart-shattering moment to see Vic go out that way. Like, honestly, I think we can all collectively agree that we knew that Vic was probably going to end up dead. Like, if you watch enough mafia stories, you watch enough storytelling in this matter, you knew that something was bad going to happen to Vic. But I think it was just a matter of how it happened, right? Like, again, being strangled, and how he went out that way. And then just going back to when he told Vic that if he ever lost his ma, he would lose it, right? It keeps him grounded. And again, we know that physically Frances is alive, but we know that inside she's not alive. So like that was a snapping point. Like he just completely lost any goodness, if Oz had any goodness in him. And he took care of that and took care of the goodness, which was Vic, and essentially, right? And he just killed him, and that was pretty violent and pretty sad at the same time. But now at Arkham, this being another example how they're setting up the Batman Part 2, we see that somehow Julian's got his job back working as a therapist in Gotham, and he pays Sophia a visit in her room. And very similar to Frances, minus a stroke, we see Sophia as a shell of herself. As he gives her a letter, and it's different from the letters she's been getting, like she's been getting a lot of fan mail, people asking to marry her or whatnot, but this time around, it's coming from a woman by the name of Selena Kyle, aka Catwoman, aka her half-sister, who obviously hates her father just as much as she does, as she reads the letter. And you can see the smile on Sophia's face, but also for my Batman fans, me being one of them, back in the background, you can hear the Selena Kyle theme song from the Batman film. I love that attention to detail. But again, she sends her half-sister a letter. So the question is, what does she put in the letter? Like, did she mention that she shares a similar hatred towards their father? Did she say anything about Sophia thinking that she was the hangman, but she maybe found out from Eve that she isn't connected to the hangman and she told her the truth? And maybe she's going to get her sister out of Arkham. Either way, give me a Catwoman and Sophia spinoff. Yes, and thank you, and please. As we end this finale with Oz with his new car and a new look, or should I say a more comic book accurate look. I mean, the man's got the hat, he's got the jacket, and he's got the goddamn cane and everything. We see that Oz kept his promise to his mom and got her the dream penthouse looking over the city, but we clearly see that she's hooked into the machines, not in the way that she wanted to be, as a tear comes down her face and Oz tells her,
"It's everything you wanted."
We cut to seeing he didn't get rid of Eve after giving him up, and the whole underground operation tells Sophia where she is, and probably he doesn't know that she probably told Sophia that, but either way, you'll notice that she's wearing the same dress his mom wore and even has the same hairstyle she had at the night that they went to the club. Again, Oz is a sicko. As they dance and Oz makes her say the things he wants to hear from his mom, she plays along and says that Gotham is his and nothing can stand in his way. As the camera pans out and we see what or who's going to get in his way, and it's the mother effing back signal in the sky. That's right, my homie Batman will be off of vacation. He's been on vacation, we all know that, but he is ready to fight back for Gotham against the new kingpin in Oz Cobb, aka the Penguin. What a fantastic fantastic way to end this incredible show. So let me just break it down. Let me talk about the finale first. I think I've expressed my thoughts throughout the breakdown, but if you couldn't tell, I obviously love this finale. Sure, I have some nitpicks here and there, like Sophia, like only taking a few men to the meetups of Oz, and the fact that the name, the Penguin, wasn't really embraced by him, but we know this is like a triggering thing for him, but neither here nor there. Little things. I really have no major complaints, no issues about this finale and how it ended, and I thought that it was one of the best finales I've seen in a very long time, and also the setup for the future of Matt Reeves' universe could never be brighter after this finale. As far as the overall season thoughts, I tweeted this out earlier in the week when I saw this episode, and I've rewatched the episode a couple times now at this point, and I stand behind my first statements of this being one of the best comic book shows of all time. I mean, it's up there with any Marvel show, any MCU show. It's up there with The Boys, Invincible, Heroes, Smallville, Arrow, some of the best seasons of Arrow, some of the best seasons of Flash, Watchmen, Legion, you name it. Again, I'm not saying it's a clear winner. I'm not saying it's the absolute best, but I'm saying in my opinion, it's definitely in the conversation as one of the best comic book shows of all time. Now, passing out some awards, my MVPs, I thought that everyone in the show was incredible. Shout out to Vic, RIP to Vic. Shout out to Ma Francis. We have Sal, who was great. We got Carmine Falcone with the recast was great. Everyone was on their A game, even though I wasn't the biggest fan of the Julian character, but that aside, great performances across the board, but the MVPs, it's a two-way tie. It's between Oz, played brilliantly by Colin Farrell. Like, this show did the greatest job of all time in taking a supporting character from a film, obviously a popular character from the comics and the whole Batman lore, but still taking a supporting character from a film and making a show based around the character, giving them so much backstory, giving them so much character development was nothing short of incredible. Now, I've been a fan of Cristin Milioti for a very long time, and it's just so great to see everyone giving her the praise, giving her the spotlight, giving her her flowers for her incredible job in this series. What a fantastic performance from the beginning to the end, and just seeing her development, seeing her backstory, and she is so great. And again, thank you to the writers and the showrunners to not killing her off. I can't wait to see her again, hopefully in the Batman 2, or again, give me the spinoff between her and her half-sister. I would watch it any day and every day. And as far as my best episode of the season, I gotta go with Sophia's episode. Episode 4 was like incredible. It was a perfect episode of television, and it was the best episode in a fantastic series. Now again, I'm gonna be making a much larger video speaking to this more, but what is gonna happen next? What's gonna happen with a season 2? Now, I don't think we're gonna get a season 2 in the show, but you know, never say never. But as far as the big question, how did the Penguin set up the Batman Part 2? Again, I'll be making another video coming soon, but I could definitely see the whole political thing being a big part of the Batman. Obviously, I mentioned earlier, Harvey Dent probably being involved in the Batman Part 2 with the crime families being taken out. We have no more Maronis, we have no more Falcones, we have no more Gigantes on the streets of Gotham. So I definitely think the whole corruption with Bella Real being a big part of the Batman Part 2. And of course, Oz, he will be a big player in the Batman Part 2. Like, he's the sole survivor of the crime family massacres. And Batman will definitely be looking at him much differently than he did in Batman 2022. I want to take the time to thank you all for watching this video, but also a special shout out to anyone that watched all my 8 breakdowns. I will be making a huge video just kind of giving you an entire recap, so keep an eye out for that video coming soon. And if you are still here listening to me talking about this show, again, thank you so much. Put in the comments right now, hashtag Sophia Lives. Now again, if you're watching this on Sunday night, come and join me live. I'm probably still talking about the finale, so hit the link in the description of this video and join me on the live after show. And as always, I would love for you all to hit the like button if you enjoyed this breakdown. Share your thoughts about the finale, the series, the show. Who was your favorite character? Who was your MVP? What was your favorite episode? What didn't you like about the finale of the season? Let's talk about it in the comments. And also, how do you think the show sets up the Batman Part 2? And of course, stick around by subscribing to the channel and hitting that bell notification. Again, check out my latest videos. Give me a follow on all my social media accounts. Links to those social media accounts can be found in the description of this very video. You all are amazing. Stay safe. Come and join me live, and I'll see you all on the next video.